Thank you so much, Sherry. Thanks to Program Support Unit for helping organize this event. Thanks to the Prune Board for helping fund and support this event, because even though it's online, there's still costs involved. And for those who don't know me, my name is Luke Milliron. I'm a UC Cooperative Extension Orchard Farm Advisor in the North Sac Valley. And our first speaker is Louie Mendoza. Louie is my county ag commissioner here in Butte County, and he'll be giving us an update on laws and regs. Louie, if you want to share your screen.
Okay, is my screen being shared?
Not yet.
Is
Looks
that
good.
now?
Yep,
Uh,
perfect.
Okay, well, good morning, everyone. As Luke said, I'm the Butte County Agriculture Commissioner. I want to thank everybody for taking the time out of your busy schedule to attend the UC Prune Day. Unfortunately, we're not in person this year due to COVID, so I have a number of slides that I'll be going over. Some of them will just touch briefly on that, but I want to just give you an update on what's going on with laws and regulations. Okay, so for Butte County, we do issue restricted material permits annually. I know in some counties they may issue 3-year pesticide permits for permanent crops such as prunes, but you need to check with your county ag commissioner to find out whether you're on an annual permit or whether you're on a multi-year permit. Your certified or your private applicator certificate, that is uniform throughout the state, so that expires every 3 years. So if you want to renew your private applicator certificate, you'll need 6 hours of continuing education to renew that certificate using CE. So this past year, if your last name was R through Z, if you have not renewed your pesticide permit, you'll need, and your private applicator certificate, you'll need 6 hours of continuing education. For those that are A through H for this year, your certificate expires at the end of this year, and so you'll need 6 hours of continuing education to renew that. We have partnered with the San Joaquin County Ag Commissioner's Office. They are hosting on their homepage. They have a CE website, and county ag commissioners, because of COVID, are sending a lot of the presentations to that website. A lot of them are free, so if you need hours, you can go to the San Joaquin County Ag Commissioner's website and type in CE, and you'll be able to locate that site. Additionally, DPR has a number of continuing education classes available also. And as far as your private applicator certificate, just remember, even though you do need 6 hours, every 3 years, 2 hours need to be laws and regs, all right? COVID vaccine. So this has been quite a topic lately with the ag sector. Butte County is still currently in the 65 years and older bracket. I would ask you to contact your local public health officer or your county ag commissioner, see where your county is at. The state did add another layer for those with significant underlying conditions. We were pretty optimistic that by the end of March that we would have the ag sector vaccine available. However, yesterday we got notice from our public health director that they're moving forward with the ag sector. So what we did in Butte County is we provided ag list of all of our permittees, pest control operators, pest control advisors, certified producers, anybody involved in agriculture. We have provided that to our public health director yesterday, and they will be doing the outreach to the industry to schedule the vaccine. So I would encourage you to reach out to your local ag commissioner or your public health officer to see where everybody is at on those, because every county is a little bit different. As far as PPE, we still have a number of products available, so if you're interested, contact our office for Butte County. We have hand sanitizer, the face masks, the N95s, also the face covering, so we have all that available still. So again, reach out to your local ag commissioner if you need PPE. Pesticide in schools. So this is actually our 3rd year, I believe, going into pesticide in schools. We have implemented in January 1st, 2018, and just a reminder that if you're farming within a quarter mile of a school, that it requires you provide notification to the ag commissioner and to the school. Again, that's just if you're farming within a quarter mile of a school or daycare center. We have calschoolnotified.org. That's through your Cal Ag permit. You can provide that notification there, and growers have until April 30th of each year. So for this year, it'll be April 30th, 2021, to submit the notification for the 21-22 school year. The school year starts July 1st of this year for the upcoming year. So again, April 30th is the cutoff day for all the notification. I know for Butte County, we work with our growers when they come in. If they want to go ahead and provide that notification, we can go through that process and allow them to do the notification at that time. And again, there are some certain restrictions that apply when school is in session. That would be, the restrictions are Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. And again, there's got to be a quarter mile distance restriction for application using aircraft, air blast sprayer, sprinkler, chemigation, dust or powder, or fumigation applications. Pesticide use reports. So again, just want to touch bases on that. As far as growers, you are required to submit pesticide use reports following the month after the use of those products. Sometimes we get a tendency to get use reports every 6 months or sometimes annually. Again, they are required under the regulation to be submitted by the 10th of the following month. We need that if we don't get the use reports. I know counties take the compliance or enforcement actions a little bit differently, but for Butte County, we encourage you to get those use reports in. You may get a compliance action, would be a letter of warning or a violation notice the first time, but if you have subsequent events where you're not submitting your use reports in a timely manner, you probably end up with an enforcement action or a fine. And really, the data is really needed. We have Section 18s that the industry goes out and requests CDA or the Department of Pesticide Regulation to issue. These Section 18s require timely pesticide use information and submittal back to DPR so that hopefully we can complete the registration process for certain products. We need data for investigations and complaints, and we also need it for industry or regulatory product support. So please contact our offices or any county ag commissioner's office if you want to submit your pesticide use reports online. It's free. And again, I would just remind you that you as a grower are ultimately responsible for submitting your use reports, not your PCA or not your dealer. So if you're relying on your PCA and your dealer to submit your use reports and they're not being submitted, you will ultimately be held responsible for that. Pesticide notice of intent, just a reminder, 24-hour notice of intent. For restricted materials, obviously there are some products out there that require a little bit longer notice of intent, so just depending on the product. Pesticide labeling, just make sure you follow the labels. Labels change from year to year. Look at the PPE requirements, look at the restricted entry intervals. Some may have posting requirements. Please check out the environmental, wind, temperature, rate restrictions on the pesticide label. Again, those change periodically, so again, I would, before you go out and make an application, make sure that you read the label. Chlorpyrifos, those who've been around know that it's the trade names and no implication there, but Lorsban, Warhawk, Vulcan, those were all products that were chlorpyrifos, active ingredient products. Of course, last year in 2020, the state implemented stringent restrictions, basically eliminating the use of chlorpyrifos. That began the cancellation process in 2020. So after 2020, there is no more legal use of chlorpyrifos for agriculture production. There's some minor uses, but I'm not going to get into the details of that. So what we have been working with DPR is trying to find a viable alternative for the collection of unused materials. So we are working on that. Hopefully we can work something out because we know that there could be stock out there of chlorpyrifos. Bromoxone, paraquat dichloride, Again, Parazone is another trade name. There's been a number of regulatory changes that have been implemented. Those include certified private applicator requirements for all handlers. So if you have employees that are handling paraquat, they need to be a certified applicator. There's an EPA-approved training that's going to be done online through the EPA website, and there's some closed mixing system requirements for paraquat. Additionally, last winter, EPA proposed new safety measures for paraquat. A lot of them don't necessarily pertain to the prune industry. The ones that do are potentially would be prohibiting pressurized handgun and backpack sprayer applications, requiring enclosed cabs if areas are treated in 24-hour period is more than 80 acres. Also requiring enclosed cabs or PF10 respirators if treated in 24-hour period is less than 80 acres, 48-hour restricted entry interval, and adding mandatory spray drift language. So again, that was a proposed decision that came out last year by EPA. The comment period on that closed on December 22nd of last year. We have not heard where the EPA is moving, whether they're going to be moving forward with any of the new proposed changes. But once we know what the changes are, we'll make sure we get that out to the ag industry. Groundwater protection areas. I know for Butte County, we added 4 new groundwater protection areas. All the ones in Butte County are for runoff. Other counties have runoff and leaching areas. Again, check with your county ag commissioner to see where you are at as far as your sites and whether you're in a groundwater protection area. Again, those are the 4 sections that were added to Butte County, and we had one existing one. Just kind of give you a visual. The one with the lines is the one that we had an existing one, and the other 4 are the new ones that were added. And again, those have been added on January 1st, 2020, so we just completed a year under the new groundwater protection requirements. And again, these are specific to these products that you see on your screen. Probably not a lot of use at all in the prune industry. I don't know if anybody uses norflorazone, that's Solocam. I don't know if that is even used anymore. But again, if you are using any of these products, there are certain requirements. And there's certain, as far as the requirements, there's certain management practices that need to be followed. And these, with the checklist there, soil disturbance, incorporation, band treatment, timing, retention on the field, or some other approved alternative. So those would be the requirements if you're going to use any of those products listed on the previous slide that are going to be used in groundwater protection areas. So if you recall, back in the early spring of 2019, we had substantial rain. We had flooded orchards. We asked DPR at that time in 2019 about an exemption for fungicides over flooded orchards or orchards that had running water, standing water. And after providing information and trying to get industry support, and we did get industry support to ask DPR for the exemption, they denied the exemption. And basically we were told, and the industry was told, that you needed to look at labeling, you needed to go work with the manufacturers and get additional labeling for that would allow for those type of applications. So the industry started working in late 2019 and into 2020. Luckily for 2020, we had a fairly dry spring, so there was not very many flooding or standing water issues in orchards. So, but in 2020, the industry did receive approval for special local needs. These are 24C special local needs. These are registrations for the application of fungicides on orchards with standing water. So we did get approval of 4 products. Again, no trade names are being supported here. I'm just providing you the data that the industry has provided. So Maribon, Orondis, Procure, and Silit were the 4 priority registrations that DPR approved. The 24C special local need, that will have to be in the possession, and of course that'll be for the aerial applicator. We'll make sure we get that information out to them. The industry also looked at other products. So there's 6 other products that are currently under review at DPR. We have not heard whether these products have been approved. We will follow up, and again, once we have more information, contact your county ag commissioner, and we'll be able to provide you an update of what products are available. But these are the other 6 priority pesticides that the ag industry was looking at: Champ, Dithane, Inspire, Luna, Quadris, and Zyram. So when those of you that already received your pesticide permit this year, your restricted materials permit, you're probably asked to fill out a feasible alternatives to the use of restricted materials before applying for the restricted materials with your county ag commissioner. We have done this in the past, except it was not documented. DPR last year provided the ag commissioner's direction that we had to, in fact, document that the growers are considering alternatives. So part of this alternatives, we began implementation this year when we began issuing pesticide permits, but basically the documentation means that growers should consider effectiveness of the product, reliability of the product. They should consider economic factors, environmental factors, soil factors, technology factors when applying for restricted materials. And again, I know for Butte County, we developed, the DPR provided a template. We were able to take that template and modify it to a front and back page where growers come in, they check off the information, and then we put that in their file, and then we issue the restricted materials permits for those products that the grower would want on their permit. What we anticipate is that this component will be part of your Cal Ag permit, so hopefully for the 2021 permit year, when you come in and get your pesticide permit, that'll be part of that whole electronic permit process instead of having this additional documentation on that. We know this is a new requirement and created some additional workload for growers, but we want to ensure that we continue to protect your crops while maintaining full compliance with the requirements under DPR for the use of pesticides. And again, we created a document and available. You need to check with your county ag commissioner. I would assume by now most of you have probably renewed your certified, or those that needed to renew the certified private applicator certificate have renewed that, and if you got your restricted materials permit, you have gone through the process. For those that have not, just be aware this will be a new process. Just check with your county ag commissioner as far as what information you need to move forward with that. So I put a slide in here on Pine Creek, just so you know that we do have some impaired waterways throughout San Joaquin and Sacramento Valley. For us, it's Pine Creek. It's been one that's impaired with pyrethroids going back to 2019. We came out positive. The 2020, I haven't seen the final results there, but I know over in Glenn County and in Colusa County, some of the waterways there are also impaired. So again, the takeaway on this slide is just, if using pyrethroids, just be careful along waterways. Watch for drift. Irrigations after applications also can be a component of that. So again, just be aware of that. And because the water board is looking at those residues and looking at those waterways for pesticide residue. Pesticide container recycling. We have pesticide container recycling day scheduled March 1st at the Nutrient Facility. That's the old Holly Sugar plant up in Hamilton City. This has been provided by Bill Graves and Green Planet Plastics. We also have another one scheduled March 22nd. This will be at the east end of Walnut Avenue. It's an East Biggs. It's the old, I think, the old Butte County dump site. It might have been years ago. But anyway, those are 2 collection dates, March 1st, March 22nd. Green Planet Plastics only wants rinse containers, no PVC, please, no trash, no poly pipe. They're going to be running from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. only. We have inspectors from our office and from other offices will be participating in visually inspecting the containers. If they have any residue, you'll be asked to take them back and clean them out and then bring them back to the facility for recycling. So again, got a couple days signed up for that. Neonicotinoids, so there's 4 active ingredients, imidacloprid, thimethoxam. I'm not even going to pronounce them because they're very difficult to pronounce. But bottom line is that EPA issued a pollinator risk assessment for these 4 type of neonics back in 2020. DPR has followed suit. Bottom line is that you're going to look at probably anticipate some proposed mitigation regulations this year, and these will focus on bee protection. So there'll be limitations as far as prohibiting applications during the bloom. They may limit applications to once a year. There may be some rate limits also, and there's a potential that some of these products could be restricted materials. So again, we will be working with DPR. Once we have more information, we'll be able to share that with the ag industry. And so those are the 4 active ingredients. Some of you may have heard the trade names. I'll just go over some of the trade names that we found: Admire, Gaucho, Merit, Cruiser, Meridian, Flagship, Venom, Poncho, Belay. So those are some of the trade names that are involved in those 4 active ingredients. Again, we'll keep you all posted if there's any changes to the process for obtaining neonics in the future. Pesticides that are toxic to bees. So again, any pesticide that's toxic to bees, you need to notify before making an application. You need to notify the beekeepers within 1 mile of that treatment site. And again, no pesticide shall be applied in conflict with the labeling that comes with the product. Specifically for Butte County, we do our delayed dormant applications. We expire those at the end of January. Check with your local ag commissioner to see what the process is for your county. We, in the past, for Butte, Glenn, and Tehama County, we had used the Tri-County Bee Notification Service. That got phased out in 2020. We are using Beware. So Beware is a real-time mapping program that helps beekeepers register with the county ag commissioners. They can mark their hive locations by dropping a pin, and then applicators and growers can access the information for the mandatory 48-hour notification during to see if there's any bloom in the orchard. And again, this is the kind of the welcome slide to Beware. It talks about how to register your hives, mostly for beekeepers. For growers and pesticide applicators and pest control advisors, there's a process to utilize Beware. We have included a bee check now in Cal Ag permits. So as a grower, if you're going to use something that's toxic to bees and it requires the 48-hour notice of intent, you can check your site and click it, and it will tell you if there are any bees within 1 mile of your application site. The notification itself does not provide the notification to the beekeeper, but what it does is it provides you the contact information and the time that you can reach out to that beekeeper to get the clearance to make the application. Just follow up on pesticide drift and complaints. So for Butte County, we did not see an increase in the number of pesticide drift complaints last year in 2020, which is a good thing. I think as growers and employees, the biggest culprit out there when we do get complaints is wind speed and direction. So pay close attention when making applications. I would make sure as growers you empower your employees to make the right decision. If you tell your employees to go out and spray, they're going to spray. So just make sure to empower them to make sure that, hey, if the wind changes or gets excessively windy, make sure they stop the application, check with their supervisor, and make sure if they need to continue or not. When we do get complaints, we have to do an investigation, and as part of that investigation, if we do find violations, then we have to take either a compliance action or an enforcement action. So again, just be careful out there when you're making air blast applications to your prunes. The biggest complaint we get is, hey, I was driving by an orchard and I got sprayed. And so again, those of you that are on main thoroughfares, highways, And roads, be careful making air blast applications, especially in windy conditions. I just want to touch on industrial hemp. It's a new product being grown in California. This may show up next to your prune orchard, so just be aware. Some counties have moratoriums, some counties do not. Some counties are allowing the commercial cultivation. I know in Butte County, we approved a cultivation ordinance with some buffer restrictions. You can see there, we have a 300-foot and a 100-foot buffer. But ultimately, all the pesticide laws and regulations that apply to you as a prune grower apply to industrial hemp. And I believe there's been discussions out there about potentially using industrial hemp as if you pull out an orchard maybe for a year or two for fallowing fields as a potential alternative, and either for interplanting also in certain commodities. So, and we have seen that, especially in walnuts. So again, just kind of just be aware of industrial hemp. It may be your adjoining, it may be a commodity that's planted next to your prune crop. And again, this is just our office. I want to thank all of our office for the support. We have 3 offices, Oroville, Chico, and Gridley office. Again, that pertains basically to Butte County. We do have modified hours for COVID, and I would ask you to check with your local county ag commissioner to see if they have any modification for our hours. Our normal hours would be all day for most of our offices. However, due to COVID, we are currently closed in the afternoon. We are open in the mornings, but we are available by appointment in the afternoon. So again, check with your local county ag commissioner to see if they have any restrictions on how they're handling customers for pesticide permits or any other services that you may require from the county ag commissioner. With that, I think that takes care of my discussion. So we do have a few questions, and we covered these in the discussion. Do you want me to go over these, Luke, with them?
Yeah, we'll give them a minute here to answer them. There's 3 questions, well, and plus a 4th from Louie. So make sure you work through those, and then Louie, if you could stay on to go over those. I know you have another meeting to catch, but
not a problem.
Awesome, thanks. And then real quick, while people are answering those questions, let's go ahead and take care of the Q&A. Bruce Norton down in the San Joaquin Valley asked, is the school notification a statewide mandate or just Butte County?
It's a statewide mandate.
Got it.
And that should be uniform throughout California, every county.
Excellent. And if anyone else has a quick question, they can go ahead and type that in the Q&A. Still see answers coming in on Louie's questions. And if people also want to type into the chat which county they're calling in from, that was something Louie was interested in. Starting to slow down here on the answers, so make sure you get in your answers here. All right.
You ready to close it, Luke?
I think so. Let's go ahead and close it.
Right.
And Louie, if you could go over the answers.
Okay. So the first question, to renew your private applicator certificate every 3 years using continuing education, you will need at least 6 hours to renew. That is correct. So, and again, we went over that slide earlier, depending on where your last name is alphabetically. But yes, for the private applicator certificate, you'll need 6 hours. And then, but remember, 2 hours have to be laws and regs. So you need a total of 6, 2 of which have to be laws and regs. And it's done every 3 years for your private applicator certificate. The other option, of course, is you can come in and just take the exam. But if you're going to use continuing education as the route for your certificate renewal, you'll need at least 6 hours. The second question was, agricultural pesticide use in your schools, quarter mile requires annual notification to the schools and agriculture commissioner by April 30th of each year. That is correct. April 30th is in regulation, so by April 30th of each year, you need to provide, if you're affected by the regulation, you'll need to provide the notification to the ag commissioner and to the schools, and you can do that through that one slide, this calschoolsnotify.org, and you can do that through your county ag commissioner if you so wish. The third question was recent pesticide label registration, special local needs. SLNs allow for application of certain fungicides to flooded orchards or orchards with standing water. That is correct. Last year we did not have the SLNs, and we were not allowing applications to occur. But again, in 2020 we had a dry spring, so it wasn't that much of an impact. But again, now we do have 4 products that are priority products, and they're working on 6 other ones. And that was it.
And you had a unanimous vote that you're the best ag commissioner.
Yeah, nobody should have missed that 4th question either. So
very good, Louie. Thank you so much for being on and giving us an update on laws and regulations.
Thank you, everybody. And again, I would just emphasize that be careful out there. Have a good year. Contact your county ag commissioner if you have any questions relating to pesticides or anything related to what our office offers. So thank you again.
Excellent. Thank you. And Sarah, if you want to share your slides. Sarah Castro is our prune breeder at UC Davis, working with Dr. Ted DeYoung, and she will give us an update on the exciting advances in the prune breeding program. You're on mute, Sarah.
Thank you. I appreciate the introduction, and I appreciate telling me I'm on mute. So yes, like Luke said, I run the prune breeding program at UC Davis under the management or direction of Dr. Ted DeYoung. And today I'm going to go over a little bit about our program's objectives, and then I will review some of our newest items that are ready for grower trials. And then I'll go over Yola Gold and Solano Gold and questions. So just a brief overview. Our program's objectives. We really want to reduce grower operational costs. We feel like we can do this by introducing a new, more efficient French-like variety. And so doing that, we want to lower the dry weight ratio of a new cultivar. We want to maybe have it have a different tree structure for less pruning costs, and possibly change the bloom timing to reduce risk during bloom. So going in a little bit to talking about pruning and tree structures, you can see in these slides that we have a diverse set of genes that we have of trees with, there's columnar items that are really upright spreading, short internodes, meaning it's more bushy and dense, and secondary woods. These are different ways of thinking about prune trees, right? And this would be with a new variety. We think a new tree structure type would provide us new opportunities to save money, whether it be with mechanical pruning or not pruning at all like they do in almonds. So these are things that we're looking at and come into factor when we're looking at new cultivars for our program. We just feel like there's a potential there with all these other items. So going in and talking about bloom, you think about it, the whole industry has one cultivar, right? So if you guys have a bad storm during bloom, you all have bad crops. Or if you have really high heat during bloom, you all get a bad crop. So if we had more than one cultivar, this could spread the risk of having overall crop failures for California, right? So this is an image of the bloom spread that we have in some of our top items. So you can see it up on the top, we have improved French and blue. And this was last year's data in winters. And you can see that we have some items like this purple one on the bottom, the J2N127, which is one we'll talk about later. It starts blooming 10 days before improved French. And so if we have a crazy storm right after it bloomed, maybe that one's going to produce more fruit than improved French that year. or seeing that in some of our grower trials. So we have a lot of data on bloom, but this is just some of our items to give you an idea of, that there can be other bloom times. Majority of our trees all bloom before improved fringe. So just to give you a little background about our program, we are a traditional breeding program, meaning that we make crosses. We take flowers from one tree, make crosses, produce fruit of those trees, plant the seeds, and then grow those seedlings. So you can see here, I sometimes use cages to make crosses, and I take the fruit, plant those seeds. Usually we plant them at Sierra Gold these days. They help us save a lot of money by using their technology. And then we plant the seeds in a seedling block. And it's my job over the summer to evaluate thousands of those seedling trees that are coming into bearing and determine if they're appropriate for the industry. If it's a tree that the industry would find appropriate as a replacement or in addition to improved fringe. So as I kind of touched on a little bit with the pruning slide, prunes in general have pretty great genetics in the fact that they're a hexaploid rather than a diploid. People and peaches and a lot of things, most things are diploid, but prunes are unique in the fact that they're a hexaploid, so they have 6 sets of genes rather than just 2. So as you can see in this slide, we have a great variation of phenotypes, meaning a lot of, a great variation of what the trees look like. This is great because we can really focus on selecting for items that have this great dried quality that we're looking for. We're looking for stuff with low dry away ratio that has really durable skin and durable flesh, and that'll look and taste like improved fringe. So we're looking for this durable flesh and durable skin because we want you to be able to go shake your whole orchard, stick them in bins, and not have a drop of juice come out the bottom because they're that durable. If you think about it, like you think of tomatoes, right? We have a processing tomato and a fresh tomato. We are making processing prunes. We are not making fresh prunes. We're making a processing item, and that is what our program is looking to release, an item that has low moisture so that it is able to withstand all the processing that it goes through with pitting, steaming, going on belts through Sunsweet and Marianne or wherever. And so that's what we're looking for. It is interesting though, if you look at this slide with all these fruit, there's a lot of different colors, right? But if once you dry them, they all look very similar. So these are not the exact same fruit, but it is, you can see here that a lot of these in this dried fruit were yellows, but they dried this nice deep dark brown mahogany black color. And the longer they're stored, the darker that they get. And so it's kind of crazy to see all those colors beforehand, and they all kind of dry very similarly. Okay, so going into some specifics of some of our top items, we are anticipating on planting hopefully an acre of each of these items in the next year. These are our top items going into grower trials. We have I-12S6, I-14N25, and J2N127. I'm going to try to go into a little bit more details, but in broad strokes, I-12S6 has a really long harvest window that spans before and up into maybe even a little after improved fringe. We have I-14N25. We selected that one because it looks so much like improved fringe. And then we have J2N127. It just has such a great low dry away ratio. Harvest 1 week after fringe, and is just looking very promising. So those are our 3 items that we are getting larger in right now. So this is I-12S6. It has a really long harvest window and a great low dry away ratio, regardless of harvest date. Usually with French, if you're going to harvest really early, you're going to be sacrificing your dry away ratio. You don't get that with this item. You can see here on the table here, I have a test date from early August, and I have a test date on the bottom from early September. And you're not losing that much in dry away ratio. So you can harvest this one in the early part of its window and not have to sacrifice the dry away ratio. We have found that of all the different tastings we've done, of all the different harvest dates, that we feel like it tastes the best if you harvest it right around improved French time, but it is flexible. They're all very good. This year it blew, or in general, I'm sorry, it blooms 10 days before improved French. Right now, my trees in winters are at about 5% bloom open right now. So they're definitely blooming before improved French. We do need to evaluate this item further on its tree structure. Right now, I think it's awesome because it doesn't produce a lot of excess growth. So you don't have a lot of extra growth to prune off, but it's still new and we're still learning more and more about it. We have budded trees coming out of the nurseries for us to look at. So going over it a little bit more, you can see here's the fresh fruit. This is the tree that I pruned this year. Didn't take very long to prune at all because there wasn't a lot of excess growth. You can see in the slide, the table there, this data is the last 3 years of data. And the dry away ratio is still low at 2.5 to 2.4 in the last 3 years. The pressure doesn't decrease that much. That's probably something I should have mentioned on the last slide. A lot of our items that tend to dry on the tree and have low dry away ratios do not get very juicy and they don't soften. It's like they're losing moisture and they get a little bit more firm and they don't get soft, but they still produce a great tasting dried product. So this is something that's new and exciting, where you might not have to worry about the pressure dropping too far. Okay, moving on. I-14 and 25 is another one of our top items. We really have selected this one because the dried fruit seems to resemble improved French so much. And so we have data here from the last 3 years. The dry away ratios range from 2.5 to 2.6. And pressures are a little softer, but this one also tends to dry on the tree somewhat. It does have a lighter color. That you can see the structure is a little bit, it's not quite bushy, but it is a little bit more dense and not as upright and spreading. So we still have a lot to learn about this tree as well, but we really have selected it for its superior flavor and ability to look a lot like improved French. Okay, moving on. So J2N 127 is an item that has looked great those last few years. And we have been pushing it to see how low I can get the dry away ratio with the fruit still tasting awesome. And this year I was able to get it down to 2.2. If I waited, that was harvesting it with improved French. Previous years, harvesting it with improved French and having good low dry away ratios. This year I got selfish and I overcropped the heck out of this tree. As you can see in the picture, there's clusters of fruit on this tree. And because of that, the fruit is was too small. So we have to make sure we don't overcrop this tree. You know, with any tree, if you overcrop it, you have some consequences if you get greedy, like I did this last year. So the fruit was a little on the small side, but it still produced awesome tasting fruit. And as you can see, I overcropped the heck out of it and it still got a 37 bricks. I mean, that's pretty great. And it really does dry on the tree. I harvested it again the week after the data that I showed you before. So this would be on the September 8th I harvested it. I got a 1.6 dry away ratio of this item. So you can see here, the fruit really does dry on the tree. You can see that it's starting to wrinkle, it's starting to desiccate more, right? So if I think of this as the industry starting to be more and more efficient, you're going to lose the moisture in the orchard. So you don't have to pay as much to move that water to the dryer. Your fruit is already starting to dry before it gets to the dryer. So maybe cheaper transportation costs, cheaper drying costs, because it's going to take less energy to remove the water from that fruit. So this is all really cool stuff that the industry can take advantage of if it chooses to. So we do have 2 items that we plan to release. We have Solano Gold and Yellow Gold. They were both given out as samples at the Prune Summit that was held this time last year, right before the world stopped. And so it's great to get those out, and it's created some buzz, I guess, on some of these items. So Solano Gold and Yellow Gold are both yellow fruit, and they're both very different, but both very awesome in their own ways. So we'll go over those in detail. So this is the table of the harvesting from this last year, from the 2020 data. As you can see, Solano Gold harvests early. It harvests about almost a month before improved French. So if you choose to grow Solano Gold, you would need to make sure that your dryer is on board to handle that fruit so early in the year. Yellow Gold, on the other hand, is later than improved French. It's usually a week or 2 after improved French. They both have fairly good dry away ratios. Solano Gold was selected because it has an awesome dry away ratio, and Yellow Gold was selected because it has an awesome flavor, an awesome taste. So going into Yellow Gold in detail, this is a good picture of it. Like I said, it has excellent dried taste, late harvest, upright tree structure. I think that it's very consistent in its fruit size, and it's not going to give you too small of fruit. It will overcrop itself before it gives you small fruit. Like I said, good upright tree structure. It'll overcrop if you don't thin it, and it will hurt your tree if you do not thin it, if it needs to be thinned, just like any other tree. But it blooms about 4 days before improved French, so it has not started blooming yet this year. In 2020, we shaker harvested. We have 2 rows of it in winters. We shaker harvested it 2 weeks after improved French, and we had it pitted and dried at Mariani, and the results were very, very promising. The processor had great things to say about it. It had a dry away ratio of 2.4, and I had people approaching me telling me how great they think the flavor is. So that's really exciting. We have trees of this going in up north, and if you're interested in trialing this tree, we are more than happy to. You would have to sign a test agreement, and once it's patented, then you can grow it as much as you want. So, but we just haven't patented it yet. Sorry, I just checked the chat, so I shouldn't have done it. There we go. Okay, moving on to Solano Gold. So as you can see in these pictures,
Sorry to cut
it
in,
really
Sarah.
does.
You're cutting out just a teensy bit if you want to try.
Thank you for telling me.
Yep.
1 second. Get my big old headphones on.
So it might be your internet, Sarah. If it keeps doing it, we'll ask you to turn your video off. It helps
Okay.
sometimes.
Great. Yeah, I've got 2 kids upstairs doing Zoom calls right now, so you'll have to excuse me. All right, let me turn off my video. Okay, great. Okay, so Solano Gold, you can see here in the pictures that it does indeed dry on the tree, and it about 50% of it will dry on the tree. The other fruit will not dry quite as much, but once you get it through the dryer and the fruit equalizes after drying, you can't tell the difference. So you can see it will crop up quite nicely. It will have to be thinned if you overcrop it like any other tree. It's a round yellow fruit. Like I mentioned before, the Salado Gold harvests early. It harvests about a month before Improved French. So you'd have to be ready for that. It blooms anywhere from 10 to 30 days before Improved French. Right now, I have about 1% of its blooms are open. It is just about ready to pop these days. And that's the trees in winters. So it's a very leafy, beautiful tree. I would say we need a little bit more research in the southern San Joaquin Valley to make sure it can withstand that real high heat. And because it dries so much on the tree, I would like to see a little bit more testing on its drying times to see if we don't have to dry it quite as long as a typical prune. So I would like to invite everybody to my industry meeting that I host every year at the Wolfskill Experimental Station in Winters. We hold it usually in early August or late July, depending on when harvest time will be that year.
Sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you.
Oh my gosh. But anyway, it's a great day. We walk around my orchard, taste test fruit off the tree. I'll be bringing lots of dried samples this year, seeing that we didn't get to meet in person the year before. And it's a great way to just see the trees in person and learn more about our program. So if you're interested in attending this meeting, please get in touch. Usually the Plum Board sends out a notification, but you could always get in touch with me from this email, or your farm advisor can pass my info along. So we're really lucky this year to have the Plum Board is starting to come up with a plan to test some of these top items. So that's really exciting for us. We're really grateful to have these industry volunteers that are willing to test these larger numbers of trees, especially the 3 test items that we talked about today. So we have items that'll be ready for planting potted trees in the fall and bare root trees in winter 2023. So if you're interested in growing or trialing any of this stuff in your orchard, we are more than happy to cooperate and kind of go for that. So my contact information is there on the bottom. And like I said, there's easy ways to get a hold of me through your farm advisor. They all know me. And I just really want to thank our industry cooperators. The Prune Board funds us and gives us a lot of support. Sierra Gold literally saves our program thousands of dollars by letting us plant our seedlings at their location. They've been a great help to our program. This year, Marianne and Sunsweet and Taylor Brothers were all great in test pitting some of our items. And so I don't know why Sunsweet's covered up. Sorry about that, but they did a great job helping pit some of our trial items, and we really appreciate it. Without their help, you know, we cannot be successful because we have to be able to process any of these items that come out of this program. So I'm more than willing to take any questions you might have.
Yeah, if folks want to type any questions into the chat, and then we also have a question for all of you up on your screens right now. If you want to answer, if you are a grower, how interested are you in planting new prune varieties? We'll give you a second for that. But while people are answering that, if you have any questions for Sarah, I see one came in from the great Michael Weston. Mike asks, what rootstocks are you using? Krimsk 86 would be nice.
Good question. I thank you for asking that. That's a great question. So typically I start, you know, I have these seedlings that are on their own roots and I graft them onto a rootstock. So I typically graft them initially onto 29C or M40. And I do that just because I need to make sure they're compatible. And I know for sure 29C and M40 are compatible with prunes. Krimsk 86 does have a little bit of peach in it. And there had been some trees that we have that are not compatible with peach rootstock. So I'm fairly sure that all of our varieties will be compatible with Crim City 6, but I'm not 100% sure. So those are things I need to test before we plant 5 acres of Crim City 6 on a variety or cultivar. So I thank you for asking that. And yes, mostly M40, 29C, occasional M26, 24. But yeah. So.
Really good question, Michael. Thank you.
All right.
So Luke, there are a couple of questions in chat
Okay.
from Lee Heringer and Kerbunder.
Yeah, so from Lee, are there any variety trials for canker disease, specifically for cytospora or other diseases?
That's a good question. Not at this moment, but Daisy might be able to speak to that a little bit. They have, usually if Sierra Gold has leftover trees of mine that no one has taken advantage of, we give them to Daisy's program for them to try to kill. So she might have some information on that, and she can present that later. But on our end, we don't do any of those testings ourselves.
Excellent. We'll be able to see Themis's thoughts on that as well from the cytospora perspective. And then from Gabinder, with the early bloom, is there more chance of frost and more chance of other diseases due to wetter conditions?
Yeah, you'd think there would be, but I think spreading that risk is more important. And I also think that with the changing climate, the frost doesn't seem to be as big of a issue as it maybe was 30 years ago. I think also, to raise another issue, if the bloom's too early, you guys might have to compete for bees with almonds, which is a problem, right? So that's another factor in changing the bloom time. So maybe not, probably don't want it too early because of all the factors like frost, like you mentioned, but I think ideally we would want to change the bloom date by 5 days. So nothing too extreme.
Yeah.
So.
But one potential advantage, as Franz will be talking about in his talk, is that so often we face heat at bloom. These 80 degrees plus. So these early bloomers could help with that. All right. Well, Sarah, thank you so much. It looks like we got a lot of folks who are at least maybe interested in planting new prune varieties, and some folks that are even very interested. So thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
And then next up, we do have Themis Michailides. If Sarah wants to end her share, and Themis, you want to go ahead and share your slides. Themis, Dr. Themis Michailides is a UC Davis plant pathologist based at the Kearney Ag Research and Extension Center down in Parlier. And that looks perfect, Themis, if you want to take it away.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending this talk. This morning, I'm going to give you an update on the cytospora canker management, merely, and also to report on old and new developments in studying this disease. So today, I will refer to some general information about the disease. We'll show you some of the symptoms, signs of the pathogen, the diagnosis, tell you a little bit about the pathogens that cause the cytospora canker, the time and the ways these pathogens infect, and I will answer some questions. And finally, I will report on management of the disease, new information that we have developed in the last several years with the support of the California Prune Board. So the cytospora canker has become very severe in the last decade or so, and perhaps there are some reasons why we have this disease so frequent, and you'll realize from this talk why the disease is in very high levels, in particularly in prunes. We have changes in the agricultural tree crop landscape, more irrigated acreage, particularly with increased acreage of nut crops. A lot of irrigation is going on and a lot of humidity in large areas, and that perhaps has an effect. Recent changes in the pruning practices in the prunes. Years ago, they used a lot of mainly hand pruning, and now we have growers who use hedging and topping, and because of these labor issues. Warmer climate, warmer summers, warmer temperatures, and these pathogens that cause cytospora love this type of environment. And also increase tree stress in prunes with the drought years, and that affects, of course, the disease. And in addition, we know that this pathogen has a very effective, efficient reproductive system. So the importance and the seriousness of this disease shows here with these surveys. In every year with the samples we collect or the samples sent to the laboratory, cytospora is the main pathogen that we isolate from these samples. And as you can see, in every year, cytospora will be the one with the 3 stars. So it is very frequent. This slide here shows on the left top is the cytospora with old names, cytospora leucostoma and sicta. And also the other canker pathogens that we isolate from prunes, but you will see during this talk that these pathogens can occur in prunes, but are important for other crops in California. But we do isolate a lot of Butyrosphaeriaceae, Butyrosphaeria, Laceo-diplodia, Phomopsis, and Phoma, and all these can occur in prunes, and also the Fusarium and Paecilomyces. All these cause cankers that are very different than the cytospora. So the symptoms, the fungus, this pathogen kills the branches, major shoots, branches can be killed, as you can see here. It's very severe in cherry and prune. And the way you recognize this is by the bumpy appearance of the shoots, the kill shoots. And if you if you remove the epicuticular, the upper surface of the bark, you will see these structures, which is nothing else but the pycnidia of the fungus. And this pycnidia can have many chambers. And here is a cross-section of the pycnidia with a lot of this gel-type substance is masses and zillions of spores, minute spores of cytospora. You can see here another appearance of the canker, very distinct, killing the wood, and in cross section, as you can see in this also. To distinguish cytospora from the bacterial canker, you can see that the killing of the wood in cytospora is a continuous dead tissue, but in bacterial canker, in addition to the continuous dead wood, we also have these pockets of dead tissues, and that's very distinctive for the bacterial canker. And that's one way to distinguish. Cytospora is a genus with a lot of species and in fact, a lot of trees, not only agricultural trees, but also a lot of forest trees. It is particularly severe in prunus. And here you can see the peach orchard in Grand Junction in Colorado, severely infected by the cytospora. In fact, this is the major disease in this area. A lot of trees are losing major scaffolds, and in peach, the peach reacts really severely to these infections, causing this aggressive production of sap, as you can see here. We do get sap in prunes, but not so severe as in peach or even nectarines. In almonds, cytospora can affect also almonds, but you can see the cankers are very small and restricted and mainly associated with wounds. We also found it in walnuts, it's not a major in walnuts, also in pistachios. So cytospora has been reported in the literature as peach canker because it can occur in peaches very severely, vasa canker and perennial canker. And this last name is because the canker does not stop in 1 year, but continues in the subsequent years to grow. So the pathogens that cause cytospora canker are, in the old literature, are cytospora leucostoma and cytospora cincta. But lately, we provided some varicolates from prunes and other hosts. And we found that this the cytospora that infects the prunes has a new name, cytospora plurivola. Regardless of the old name or the new name, the fungus causes a very, very severe disease, the cytospora canker. And here you can see how the fungus grows in petri plates, very flat culture, and sometimes produces the pycnidia in culture, and you can recover the spores easily. So what are the common infection sites for cytospora? We know it is a weak pathogen, but it infects killed bark. Injure bark by low temperatures, by freeze damage, or by sunburn, or injuries from pruning cuts. So all this can be easily infected. If we have insect damage by borers, like flat-headed borer or other types of borers, they can also create wounds for infection by cytospora. Even cankers that are caused by the brown rot fungus Morellina laxa can be colonized by cytospora, and then the fungus can increase in size. The canker can increase and become cytospora canker. We had wind injuries or hair injuries, and those can be infected. The leaf scars or the peduncle scars, this is not very clear in the literature. We plan to investigate this year. There was a study in Washington State where they inoculated leaf scars of cherry and they were not able to get infection. Mechanical wounds, any type of wounds can be infected. So once the pathogen establishes in dead or weakened tissues, the cytospora pathogen then will invade adjacent healthy tissues and will cause a dieback and shoot cankers in branches. So here's an example of wounds infection. Here we have on the left, we have the injuries by hail that were infected by cytospora. And here a grafting union that developed like cytospora canker in the rootstock and also in the scion. It's moving this way and also in this way, killing the scion. And this is very important because if we have contaminated bodywood, perhaps you will get high levels of infection of this type. So the fungus, this fungi, the cytospora, can infect at any time of the year, except in very hot weather and very dry and very cold weather. Although there are other studies, cytospora in apple, for instance, it infects in winter. There are some studies there. Mainly in prunes, the infections occur during spring and early summer when the temperatures are mild and the moisture from rainfall is high. And this is because the fungus spreads with rain-splashed spores. The pycnidia spores, which are the spores that occur in pycnidia, and they are splashed by rain, do not germinate fast in low temperatures. In 40 to 50 Fahrenheit, they need 2 days, 48 hours to germinate. However, this fungus also produces the ascospores, which are the airborne spores, and those germinate much faster at this low temperature, 50 degrees. So the ascospores of Cytospora can have an advantage in lower temperatures to get established infections. Here, this is from new research where we compare the rate of growth of Cytospora and the Botrytis fungi between and compare them on almond shoots and prune shoots. We can see this highlighted two graphs. In prunes, the fungus has an optimum from 77 to 95 Fahrenheit. In almonds, the pathogen has only the optimum temperature 77. We can see that it grows really fast. It prefers prune wood than almond wood. And the opposite is for the other fungi. You can see the Botrytis, they don't grow very much in prune, but they grow very well in almonds. And so here, regardless of the temperature, if you compare the growth of Cytospora between these two crops, the Cytospora in prunes grows 2.5 times faster on prune than in almonds. And this faster growth makes the Cytospora a severe disease for prunes, but not so severe in almonds. And the exact opposite occurs with the Botrytis fungi. Those grow really fast in almonds, and we have a very serious disease of Botrytis caused by Botrytis fungi in almonds, but very slower in prunes. And these fungi, although they're isolated from prunes, they do not cause a major disease. So this type of difference can explain why we have so severe appearance of the disease on prunes. Let me go back to the biology of this fungus, the Cytospora. We have shoots here with a lot of bumps, as you said, and those bumps have a characteristic white opening here, white dot, and this is very typical for the Cytospora canker. If you see this on prunes, that's Cytospora. There's nothing else that can cause this type of white spots. Removing the upper layer of the bark, you can see the Pycnidia really well. Now, the rain can splash this Pycnidia, and they become water splash, as I said earlier. However, if the rain stops and the Pycnidia continue oozing the spores, the spores that come out, they come out in little strings that dry. And you can see here in another species, very, very distinct, almost like hairs. And they can spread now, they can, with a wind, they can spread and become airborne. In addition, this fungus produces the perithecia, which is the sexual stage of the fungus with the asci and the ascospores, and the ascospores are airborne. However, in California, we never found that stage, although well, it may exist, but we have not found it. Or if it is present, it will be not so common. So the main source then is the water splash pycnidiospores. And we did studies to monitor what density we get in almonds and in prunes mainly. This slide is from a setup we had in almonds, but we did the same with the prunes. We have these funnels with this spore trap, and after the rain, we had Franz Niederholzer collecting this and putting the new bottles, the empty bottles, collecting the water here, and we took this, we were taking this to the laboratory, and we determined the density and of these fungi that were trapped in the rainwater. As you can see here, the Cytospora, which is indicated, this was done with quantitative PCR. In other words, we measure the DNA of this fungi in the water. So the Cytospora, which is indicated with the green color here, were very dominant throughout the rainy season from February to March, and at the highest levels in all these 3 prune orchards. We continued this study in the following year, in 2017. And from October to January, when this over here, we got some cytospora, but mainly during that time, we did not have any significant amounts of cytospora. And this, of course, is the time for doing the pruning in prune orchards, because you want to do the pruning at a time when it's dry, although we had some rains during that year. Now, how does cytospora infect a tree? And this is new information that we got in the last few years. We know that cytospora is a weak pathogen, but it has a very efficient spore inoculum production system. Remember, these cross sections of the pycnidia are full of zillions of spores, of minute spores. Cytospora has two mechanisms of infection. We have first latent infection, or endophytic infection, as we call it, infections that are in close association with the host, but no symptoms of disease are expressed. And these latent infections wait for a stress to infect or a wound to also cause cancer. Then we have the external inoculum. The external inoculum, when we have wounds that can be infected, when there is no wounds, is not shown here. When there is no wound, then instead of infection of disease, they cause latent infections. Latent infection then will come back here, and when we have stress, will bring the cycle of this type of infections in prunes. So this is something new that we investigate, and we know, and we're very confident about the latent infections of cytospora in prunes. Here is an example of the first mechanism of infection with latent infections, and this is with oil burn, phytotoxicity by oil. But any stress can trigger this latent infections. You can have water stress, you can have freeze damage, sunburn, potassium deficiency, insect like aphids infestation, and oil phytotoxicity. And here is this example. This prune grower had a severe phytotoxicity by oil, and these shoots were covered with cytospora pycnidia by 3rd of June. And in this case, we don't have individual cankers developing in one area, a canker moving from an area down. The canker developed throughout, and they were covered with pycnidia. And this is another indication that these latent infections are all over the healthy tissues. Now, another example of the first mechanism is when we have a bacterial canker. These cankers caused initially by bacteria, the Pseudomonas, but then cytospora, the latent infections of cytospora can be triggered in these dead tissues, and then cytospora can develop, and frequently we find both bacterial canker and cytospora together. An example where the first and the second mechanism of infection are presented was done with this experiment, where we did pruning of shoots, and we covered half of those pruning wounds with a plastic secured to the pruning wound, and we left the others uncovered. So with the external inoculum, the uncovered, of course, the external inoculum causes the main infection of the uncovered pruning wounds, but also we have infection to some level, up to 20% here, by latent infections of the covered with plastic wounds. So this is another indication that these latent infections also can infect pruning, any type of wounds, or pruning wounds in this case. Another example here is water stress. Of course, this experiment was done after inoculating the plants, either before imposing the water stress or after the water stress irrigation. So in this example, we showed that the trees that received the least irrigation developed the most severe cankers, which tells us that water stress, drought, and things like that contribute to the development of severe cankers in prunes. When you have a mature orchard with a lot of cytospora and you have empty spots and you plant your new plants here, you need to protect these new plants because the pruning wounds can be infected severely by inoculum here, by inoculum that comes from the older trees. We did a study and we showed that these pruning wounds are susceptible for 2 weeks. So these pruning wounds, these young plants that are pruned in mature orchards need to be protected for at least 2 weeks with a topsin in order to prevent the initial infection of the plants. If you check the literature, you will see quotations relevant to cytospora canker management like this. Avoid planting susceptible tree species or tree cultivars. Of course, in our case here, we have the French prune. I don't know about the other cultivars that Sarah was talking. It would be nice if the nurseries give us some of these plants and we can try them to see if they're susceptible or resistant or tolerant. And in this case, with prunes, French prune is very susceptible. We cannot really change a crop. So no practical cure for it. Managing cytospora canker involves total orchard management. Of course, you know this. Because this canker disease usually occurs on weekend host, the primary method to control is to prevent stress of the tree. And fungicides are not effective against cytospora canker, as the literature indicates, but topsin is effective. In these experiments here in 2015, 2016, and 2017, we did one spray in early spring with topsin. We prune, we make cuts, pruning wounds, and we spray with several fungicides and topsin. And consistently, topsin was the one that really reduced infection. Topsin M70% showed consistent results in all 3 years by reducing the reduction of infection. This was applied immediately after pruning. So we want to determine, because when you prune, it takes time to finish the pruning. You cannot do it in 1 day and then immediately apply the topsin. We want to see if we apply topsin immediately or topsin 7 days after pruning. And also in this trial, we included trichoderma biocontrol as immediate application after the pruning. In this example here, when we evaluate the infection, we found that only the topsin treatments immediately or 7 days after the pruning were the ones that really reduced the infection rate. The biocontrol, this is shown with the blue bars, the biocontrol had no effect in reducing infection. And also, you can see here, when we evaluate the severity of all the treatments, there is no difference, which tells us once infection starts, there is no way this the fungicide or the biocontrol will reduce the canker. The canker will develop to the same level, to the same severity. Now, in the last couple of years, we're checking to see if these latent infections occur in budwood. We checked 3 nurseries here. In 2 nurseries, we found latent infections in budwood, in 2 of these. We found latent infection by other fungi, Botryosphaeriaceae fungi, in 3 of the nurseries. Now, we don't know if and how much of these latent infections will develop in the young field when you plant the new trees in the orchard. However, when we did a similar study with prunes, with almonds, and we try to protect these trees before the young trees, almonds in this case, the young trees, try to protect, prevent development of these latent infections by spraying on toxin application in the spring. We found out that whenever, in this case, we used 2 treatments, Topsin and Raleigh, the reddish, the carrot color and the gray color. You can see one spray really reduced the infection severely. And you can see the untreated control, all 3 reps, very high levels of disease developed. And this application was done in March, before we had any symptoms appearing. But 6 months later, March to November is 8 months later, you can see the levels of disease. Now, 14 months later, we did not put another spray. You can see all the rates increase, more disease developed, even in those that were treated with Topsin. And the ones who they were treated with Topsin and Raleigh, even more. So this tells me that one spray was not sufficient, but we probably needed another spray in the following year, or perhaps even 2 sprays in the spring in the first year in 2019. So this is something that we like to do with the prunes and see if we protect these trees when they are very young in the orchard, we can reduce the rates of cytospora. This was done with Botrys furiaceae fungi. So the fungicide Topsin was confirmed to be very effective after application of pruning wounds immediately, or even after 7 days. And that will give enough time to finish your pruning, remove the prunings from the ground, and then apply the fungicide. Drought and other stress of trees are considered major factors contributing to severe cytospora canker and should be avoided by all means. Pruning is very susceptible host to cytospora. The pathogen grows faster, prefers prunes than almonds or other prune species. And this also makes it why the disease is very severe in prunes. And here are some general common sense conclusions here. Maintain healthy trees and good vigor. Of course, everybody tries, all you try to do that. Prune out and destroy dead and diseased shoots and branches to limit the external inoculum. Wood piles, if you have wood piles can be important source of inoculum by splash of rain. And if there are the airborne spores, then it will be even worse. Burn it or remove it. Prevent sun scald or prevent damage by borers. Avoid water stress. Avoid potassium deficiency, because those will cause defoliation, which will lead to sunburn and then infection by cytospora. Control aphids, which also will cause defoliation and sunburn, and stress the trees, of course. And spray with Topsin after pruning to reduce the incidence of canker. For newly planted orchards, and that's what we would like to investigate, you may want to spray an early spring spray with Topsin to prevent cytospora appearing in these young trees at the early stage of development of the orchard. I think this question will be presented by Luke, but I would like to thank you and thank my people and the California Prune Board for the support of this research. And thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Themis. Those DPR questions are up for people to start answering. But while they do, Themis, I'll ask you a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Steve asks, have you looked at using rime on the soil or chemigated for cytospora?
No.
Okay. And then from Dave, how far up the scaffolds are you spraying the Topsin when spraying in March? Can this be accomplished by using an air blast sprayer and directing the nozzles at the desired area instead of using a handheld?
When we spray the almonds was only the trunk and the lower part of the scaffolds. But in prunes, of course, this was done by, as you saw in the picture with the hand sprayer. But if you do it commercially, of course, this would be with probably air blast to cover the entire tree, since we are going to do some pruning to develop the canopy, and that way it will cover also the pruning roots and the trunk of the trees.
Okay, another question from Steve. Would you recommend including topsin in the bloom spray program as well?
That will take care of the some of the brown rot if we don't have resistance. I would say yes.
Yeah, and I do not know off the top of my head how hard topsin is on bees, so I would really pay attention to the label on that and check the UCIPM website. Rich asks, would you not recommend shredding prunings? I assume shredding them and leaving them in the orchard.
In all the orchards where the prunings will have a lot of dead tissues, I will not recommend shredding them. It will be better to remove them because they will have a lot of pycnidia, and some of the pycnidia can survive during the winter and can have water splash spores in the lower canopy.
Excellent. And then I just have a final question myself, and that is, with topsin M being really the only material that you found effective so far, how worried should we be about resistance developing?
Yeah, I don't know that. I cannot answer. Probably it's prone to resistance, but since it will be one spray per year, the risk will be very limited.
Okay. All right. And Themis, if you want to go over the results of the questions.
Okay, the first question was, of course, both. Now we have evidence for the latent infections and the external inoculum. So that was correct. The second, what are the prune species hosts of Cytospora? The answer here was from A to E, because I think the last, the walnut is not a prunus, although it can be infected by Cytospora, is not prunus. It was a little tricky question, this one. So all the prunus species can be infected. What are the type of infections by Cytospora triggered after oil burns? Because by external inoculum. The answer is the latent infections. Okay, the latent infections are triggered mainly because they can occur throughout the shoot. And I see that the fourth question about equal people apply, apply topsin, and some others do not apply, not applicable. I don't know what does not applicable mean.
It probably means that they're not a grower, or they're not someone in a position making making these decisions. But folks, for the DPR question test that you'll be getting after 5 p.m. today, do be sure to pay attention to the answers that Themis provided, including that number 3, that the oil burn. Those are latent infections is what's behind the canker that develops after oil burn.
Yeah.
Okay. Themis, thank you so very much.
Thank you.
And if you want to end your share, we'll get Daisy's slides up. So our next speaker is Daisy Hernandez. Daisy is a PhD student in the Rizzo lab at UC Davis studying plant pathology, and she is continuing some work that many of us have already heard from Bob Johnson in past years. So she has taken the torch when it comes to Phalanus wood rot. If you want to take it away, Daisy.
All right. Okay, so to reiterate, my name is Daisy Hernandez. I'll be providing some updates about our projects on Phalanus wood rot. But before I talk about that, I'll just go over the usual biology and ecology of Phalanus first. That way people can be familiar with it. So wood decay fungi in general are primarily in the Basidiomycota phylum, historically known as historically known as forest diseases that play an important role in degrading wood and reintroducing nutrients into the forest ecosystem. Most wood decay fungi are saprophytic as they decay wood of dead or dying trees, but there are some wood decay fungi that are pathogenic, causing disease in woody host and decreasing their structural strength and growth as they age. And much of the research on wood decay fungi has been focused on the taxonomy, just naming and categorizing these fungi. So there is still much to learn about the biology and epidemiology of these fungi. So our goal has been to not only determine the problem that's affecting prune orchards, but also to be able to describe the disease and explore effective management strategies by understanding their biology and epidemiology. So what we learned in prune orchards was that there was an increased limb breakage occurring from the decay of heartwood caused by the Basidiomycete phalanus. So the disease is Phalanus heart rot. And this has led to a decreased, a direct loss in the yield by removing the tree's ability to grow fruit. So as you can see in the picture, the tree looks like it's lost half of its scaffold. So now it's only half as productive as it used to be. And it usually, the limbs don't grow back, and they don't grow back in time for them to be productive enough as they get older. So wood decay fungi can infect and weaken the structure of different parts of in a tree. And they can also spread from tree to tree in various ways, which is apparent through the patterns in the field. For example, Armillaria is a pretty known wood decay fungus with a wide host range that infects root and crown, the root and the crown of the trees. And it can spread mainly through the soil via mycelium, the white threads that you tend to see on the tree or in the soil, or rhizomorphs, which are these dark, thick, black extensions of the fungus that can help it spread. And because these are more localized, you'll end up with a clustered infection pattern that you can see in this slide, where it's semicircular areas that are just clustered throughout and patched together. On the other hand, there's wood decay fungi like Ganoderma that cause disease in almond, but they infect the root and the butt of the tree and spread sporadically through their spores. So in the picture, you can see how it's not as clustered. You really see tree loss just randomly distributed throughout the orchard. So you can see from there that it's spread through spores. And then there's Phalanus that infects the canopy of the trees and also the trunk. And just based on the infection patterns that we have seen, I don't have a map of it, it seems to spread also through spores because it has that sporadic infection pattern. And what I mean by our surveys is that first, there have been other surveys done in the 20s and the 90s, and in both cases, Philinus was not very common. We saw mainly heart rot being caused by fomitopsis, which is this reddish or rosy colored fungus, and um, it's it's mainly been known to be a sapro, but in this case, it was acting more as a pathogen. And in the 90s, we also saw fomitopsis, and only around 3% of the orchards had Philinus. So you can see that there was actually a decrease in the incidence of both fomitopsis, and Philinus was barely being seen at that point. However, in 2016 and 2019, Bob Johnson had started these surveys, and I helped continue them, where 86% of the orchards had Philinus tuberculosis. And so that was a really big difference from past surveys where there was a clear increase in the incidence of wood decay fungi, and especially Philinus in this case. There were some that still had fomitopsis, but not nearly as many. And there was Trametes and Styrium, but these are also saprobes, and they were mainly found on already dead trees. And so while during these surveys, we noticed that the infection of Philinus tuberculosis was associated with broken limbs and decayed wood that led to this really white, soft wood, almost like styrofoam. And it was delineated by these red margins that tend to occur when pathogens infect wood. The tree will try to react to it and just cause barriers around the decay. There's also a general decline in the vigor of the tree, and the definite signs of infection are the white to yellowish mycelium that tends to grow in the tree when it's moist, and also the conchs that grow, and they can produce spores that spread onto other trees. And the spores are not very visible, however. They are these very small, almost microscopic spores that are clear. So they could be spreading through your orchards and you wouldn't really be able to see them, especially when the orchards get quite dusty. So we have seen that the trees can have more than one Philinus infection at once, which supports the idea of spore spread as well, because multiple infections are most likely caused by multiple spores landing on one tree. It wouldn't be possible for it to have multiple infections through just mycelium, because it would just be one solid infection at that point. And these infections are also associated with pruning wounds, which is an agreement of our previous studies done on heart rot in orchards. We can tell that they are associated with pruning wounds because we tend to see them right underneath a bench cut like this. We'll see the cut, and then so there's two ways actually. So we'll have a bench cut like this, and we can actually isolate Philinus from these bench cuts. And then also when there's a pruning wound that's caused on a limb, usually a conch will be growing right underneath that pruned limb. And to further support that sporulation is the cause of the spread, we've noticed that the incidence of broken limbs and conchs in the prune orchards over time. And here we can see that both factors increase over time, in which both broken limbs and conchs increase exponentially at around 15 years of age. This pattern demonstrates how sporulating conchs continuously infect the same orchard. And as the amount of conchs increase with an orchard, the more spores there are to infect on wounded and broken limbs. And so the limbs start to fall, and then from the increased decay, and it's just a vicious cycle. And you can see this a literal vicious cycle that here. where you can see how the pruning wounds lead to disease development, conch formation, and just a continual increase in infection over time. So now that we've established that Phlinus is infectious through spores, we are exploring management strategies, but there are no known eradication methods for wood decay fungi. So the most feasible management approach is by focusing on prevention at this point, especially during the first 8 years of an orchard's lifespan where limb breakage is low. You can see that in the graph. We compared the susceptibility of different prune varieties to Phlinus wood decay using wood blocks, which led to variable levels of mass loss. This there was no clear indication of a variety being more susceptible to loss than others, just based on the two trials that we did on wood blocks. But this may be that because wood blocks are already dead wood and they're not reflective of how Phlinus would interact with live wood in orchards. And so we took this study and we moved it up to field trials, which where we took varieties that we took, I believe they were from Sierra Gold, and they were the 8 varieties on 3 different rootstocks. And we actually just inoculated these trees in this month with Phlinus, and I will have the results for this towards the end of this year. And I'll let you guys know in the next update about that. So another management approach that we've looked into is actually reducing or modifying pruning practices. Reducing the pruning wounds during the first 10 years of an orchard can delay Phlinus infection substantially. And a major practice is to avoid making those flat bench cuts, mainly because the flat cuts allow spores and other microbes to settle on the wounds and infect easier. So it is better that if you're going to make a pruning wound, to make it at an angle, so it is harder for spores to land on them and cause infection. They're more likely to slide off if they don't have if they don't attach to the wood on time. So it's just a better practice to do it that way. Another way to prune would be actually to prune farther away from the crotch of the tree, as this would slow down the loss of the limbs. So you might lose a smaller limb that's farther out, but you won't lose a large lateral, you won't lose a large scaffold, which can lead to a more prominent loss in your yield. And this is based on our observations of orchards that have little or no breakage in a and this happened in a 10-year-old orchard, which is circled on the graph. So what happened with this orchard was actually that it was mechanically hedged as compared to the other orchards which were pruned traditionally. I believe Rich Rosenkranz is the one who does studies on mechanical hedging, and so he would know more about the pros and cons of mechanical hedging. But for Phlinus, it seems to be the most useful in controlling Phlinus infection. Yeah. Oh, and these are the pictures of the trees or the orchard that was mechanically hedged. So you can see that there's not that many losses in limbs. So another big way to be able to control infection is through protecting the pruning wounds using biological controls. Trichoderma is a mold fungus that's commonly found in the soil, which can feed on other fungi, making it a prime candidate for Phlinus infection. Trichoderma doesn't seem to pose any risk to humans. It's not cancerous like other fungi that are. And since it is found in the soil, we're usually exposed to it on almost daily basis. And so we have tested 6 trichoderma products that are commercially available in the market on wood blocks compared to the 2 controls. Compared to 2 controls where we just did Philinus or Philinus in water. And then some of the blocks, and so some of the blocks were inoculated with Philinus first, and the others were inoculated with trichoderma first. And then 2 weeks later, the ones that were inoculated with Philinus first were then sprayed with trichoderma, and vice versa. And then our results occurred after 12 weeks, which showed a reduced mass loss in the blocks that were sprayed with trichoderma before Philinus. We attempted to recover Philinus from the blocks, and as you can see, BW161 and Ventec treatments led to low recovery of Philinus, being around 25%. Here you go. So yes, you can see that they're quite low compared to the controls, which we were able to recover 100% of the Philinus. So because of BW161 and Ventec being the most effective, based on the woodblock studies, we had moved on from them, and we were keeping our eye on those 2, but we still tested the other ones. However, we did remove BW165 because it seemed to not really cause much of a benefit when it was being used on the wood blocks. And so we moved our trials to the field, and we inoculated Philinus and trichoderma as before, where some of them were inoculated with Philinus using a wooden dowel. And then a week later, or actually a month later, we sprayed them with trichoderma, and vice versa. So then we monitored these trees for 8 months, and our results coincided with the woodblock trials, where BW161 and Ventec were the most effective at reducing the incidence of wood decay. And you can see that here, where on the table, where when sprayed before Philinus and BW161 and Ventec had a 25% and 50% incidence of white rot or wood decay when used before Philinus, compared to the other ones who were 75%, and the control was 75% as well. So they were nearly ineffective. So we just took these 2, BW161 and Ventec, and we moved on. I'll just skip that one. And we moved on to our field trials. And so what we did in our bigger field trials were that we actually took 3 active orchards that were around 5 years old, and we moved these 2 products. We sprayed them onto the, it was 27 trees in each orchard. So it was BW161, Ventec, and some of them were just sprayed with water. And we did spray them back in February of 2020. And so this month, actually on Thursday, I will be spraying the trees again with trichoderma to complete the second round of 3 of these treatments. So I'll know a little bit more about how these trees are looking and in the next week. And so another management practice is to reduce the spread of spores, which can be done by manually removing the conchs that cause the spores in the first place, or that make the spores in the first place. But we know this isn't cost effective to manually remove the conchs in the orchard, but it may be possible to reduce the spores using trichoderma products that we are already testing, because trichoderma tends to naturally eat away at the conchs. And you can see that in the picture on the slide, where it's this is a Philinus conch, and you can see the areas where the greenish white mold is growing in, that's trichoderma. the Phalaenus is sort of missing part of its pore layer. And so getting distracted by so yeah, I was saying trichoderma can eat away at the conch naturally. And we have also seen that in orchards that were sprayed with dormant oil, which you can see on this on the graph, the two circled graphs are, or the two circled dots are orchards that have been sprayed with dormant oil, and their infection rates are significantly lower than the average, which is the blue line. So it is possible that we could use oil to stop the spores from spreading by essentially suffocating the conch with the oil. So I'll be trying that as well. I'll actually be doing this on Thursday as well. When I spray the orchards, I'll be going in and also just spraying conchs individually. So I will be doing it by manually removing the conchs and then spraying the wounds with either trichoderma products, dormant oil, or water, or both. And then just spraying conchs directly. And so something that I have noted is that the trichoderma products are still able to grow in the presence of fungicides, such as topsin. And when the trichoderma products are combined with dormant oil, the products actually sporulate more than they do without the dormant oil. So it seems like a combination of trichoderma and dormant oil might actually be beneficial for managing the Phalaenus conchs. So that's why I will be testing them in my trial. And I actually went into talking about it before switching to the slide. So it's pretty much what I'm going to do. The reason I'll be doing 15-year-old orchards is just because they tend to have more conchs than usual. But that's essentially what I'm going to be doing. And I would like to thank the Prune board, and then along with my lab mates and all the growers, as well as the PCAs that have been helping me out with my projects.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Daisy. It's a fabulous presentation. So we have those DPR questions up, I think. Yep, they're up now. And then Daisy, the first question for you is, why did Phalaenus decrease from 1926 to 1990? What caused reemergence in recent years?
I'm not sure why it decreased. It must have why did Phalaenus actually did not decrease from 1926 to the 90s. I might have misspoke there, but Fomitopsis was the one that was most common in 1926, and then the Fomitopsis was the one that decreased in the 90s. Not sure why the occurrence. It could have been a change in environmental conditions that led to Fomitopsis just not being as competitive at that point. There was a slight, but then Phalaenus was found in the 90s, but only at a small percentage. And then it did start to increase over the years. It might have been that Phalaenus was starting in the 90s, and then nobody really monitored its incidence until recently, and then it jumped from the 3% back in the 90s to now what we see now.
The second question is, would you expect a typical fungicide program that you'd have in place for something like Cytospora to help with wood rot fungi?
Well, the reason we are looking into biocontrols is because we believe that fungicides aren't effective against wood decay fungi. It is the reasons why it's difficult to control is because wood decay fungi infect from the inside of the tree. And so really you would have to target inside, and there have been injectable fungicides, but those are incredibly expensive, and I would not really recommend those just based on the cost of it. And also Phalaenus, along with other basidios, tend to grow really well in things like topsin and Benamil. We actually use them as our selective media in order to be able to extract Phalaenus and things like Ganoderma out of the wood.
Excellent. And you even answered the follow-up question, which is, would topsin be counterproductive in trichoderma treatments? And the answer being there'd be no effect. Doesn't seem to affect the trichoderma at all.
Yeah.
Rich Rosekrantz asks, have you been evaluating any of Sarah's extra trees for resistance? If so, anything promising? And I think you got at this in your discussion. We'll have some results later this year.
Yes.
Awesome. So stay tuned for Daisy's evaluations of the new varieties, new selections coming out of Sarah and Ted's program. Daisy, if you want to go over the answers to the questions.
Yeah, the question was, does Phalaenus cause a prune canker? And the answer is false. It doesn't cause cankers. It causes heart rot.
And I apologize. That is my tricky question that I put in there for people. So just with the lesson of cankers, they kill bark. They're on the outside of the branch, whereas what Daisy is looking at is the internal structure of the limb, what's really keeping it together. So a distinction there. Phalaenus does not cause prune canker. So make sure to note that for your DPR quiz.
Then the second question is, what is the fungus used as a biocontrol for Phalaenus? And the answer is trichoderma.
Yep. People did a great job on that.
Yeah.
And that is all of the questions. Thank you so very much, Daisy. Excellent presentation, exciting research. And let's take a brief break, and we will be back on starting sharp at 10:45. So be sure to log back in a minute early and be ready to go. All right, thanks, folks. All right, folks, it's just about 10:45. I am just putting a quick plug in the chat since we're not addressing irrigation at all in this meeting. Irrigation is my favorite topic, but we have a lot of other obviously pressing issues in the prune industry, so it didn't fit the agenda. But I have a quick note here on irrigation system maintenance, and if you're in one of the counties that is served by the Tehama County Resource Conservation District, and you might be able to get yourself a free system evaluation. And hopefully, if you're not in one of those counties, you are in a county that is covered by another RCD program that does this work. All right, so it being 10:45, I'm going to pass things off to Joe Turkovich. Joe is a grower in the Winters area, former chairman of the Prune Board, and is someone who has taken this concept, this best practice that has been developed by UC Cooperative Extension really decades ago, showing the benefits of long pruning, and has his own twist on it and his own experience with it that he's willing to share. Take it away, Joe.
Thanks, Luke. Yeah, Luke asked me to give my experiences with, particularly with long pruning. So I think that's something that we'll find is applicable to some of these new rootstocks. And you know, a couple of the big knocks on prunes or growing prunes has been that they're slow to bear and they have poor anchorage. And part of that, those two go together because traditionally prune growers have employed what's called short pruning techniques, mainly because they're worried about blowover. But that technique became institutionalized for decades, and at the expense of methods that could have got the orchards into bearing earlier. And as you see on the left, that's a traditionally short prune tree where it was topped at let's say 3 feet, and then the primary scaffolding went up about the length of a pruning shear. It was topped again, and then that's called the primary scaffold system, and then the secondaries are the next leg up, which once again were topped at about 3 feet. So you go up incrementally, and this takes years to get the tree up to size and get it into bearing. This is a reminder of you know, why growers have traditionally done this. Just last month, we had this big windstorm that hit Sacramento Valley and Yolo County. The winds were clocked at 35 miles an hour with gusts up to 60, and you can see the damage it did locally here. And out in the fields, you can see there was extensive damage to young trees. These ones on the left were grown on a M40 rootstock. We all know that these Mariana and Mirablan and plum rootstocks were traditionally grown. Prunes were grown on them on heavier soils because that's where prunes were dedicated to, because they could do better on heavier soils. Well, but the one thing that plum rootstocks are really bad at is anchorage. We all know that. And in this case, it requires expensive, you have to make a decision whether it's even worth saving that tree. And if you do, then you got the expensive task of raising it. And there's nothing more demoralizing to go out in your orchard and see this. You know, so historically, prune growers, almond growers also have been trying to do anything they can to reduce their costs. And one of those that's been employed over the last few decades is tree topping or hedging. You'll see this in prune orchards today. When you do this, you can save money, but it comes at a cost. And you know, we'll talk a little bit more about topping and hedging. I'm not opposed to doing it entirely. I just think it should be done. It just shouldn't be done aggressively because there's real costs, and some of them are this. Whenever you prune a tree heavily and you put all that wood on the ground, you should think of all that wood as a wasted resource that could have gone towards fruiting. In my opinion, you know, the French prune is at best a semi-manageable tree. It wants to grow to a certain size dictated by its DNA and the soil conditions it's growing in. And my advice is don't fight its genes. I'll explain that a bit more. And prunings represent a wasted tree resource that could have been put towards fruiting. So the goal in my mind of the pruning is to guide the tree's development, not to manhandle its shape. And I think that you know, these new rootstocks that are now becoming available, and Crimps 86 is one of them that's getting popular, is a rootstock that allows growers to revisit how they manage their orchards and develop them. And here's an example. This is the same wind-affected orchard that you saw in the previous picture on M40 on the left. And this is that same orchard, just a few rows down where they planted them on Crimps 86. Tremendous difference. So we know that Crimps 86 has this tremendously stout rootstock, and trees just don't bend or blow over easily. So this is a little schematic my own drawn, for my own drawing. I'm not an artist, but I thought this is probably the simplest way to explain what a little bit about what long pruning is all about. On the right, you have what I would call a short pruned traditional architecture, and right here we're only looking at the support system, the structure, not the fruiting wood. So typically, as I mentioned, you start with ideally 3 scaffolds. I'll talk more about that later. That go up, say 36 inches. You top it, and then you split that into 2 more. So you go from 3 to 6. That's the secondary scaffolding zone. And then you do the same thing and you get to what's called the tertiary scaffolding zone. And then finally, more growth beyond that. You compare that to the left, which is more of a long prune style. What you do is you don't top your scaffolds and your subsequent secondary growth. You let them remain long and then later make your selections. And I'll show you some of that, but your primary zone ends up being much longer. And then your secondary scaffolding is much longer also. So when you're done, if you look at the top of the secondary zone on the left, it's equal to, in many cases, the top of the tertiary zone on the right. So you end up with much less prunings to be removed later up at the top, because all that extra, you have double the amount of leaders at the top that in many cases need to be removed. You're talking about a lot more pruning necessary. You have more shading on the right. And you also have more of a sail for wind. So it's kind of counterintuitive. You actually, these long pruning methods can actually, if they're done right, allow wind to pass through them more easily so that you can crop heavily because it's a very upright structure and still not knock these trees over when done correctly. So this is the same images, but here I added in green a key point I want to make about all this, and it's unless you've grown a tree in a long pruned method, I don't think you would be aware of this. But on the right, your traditional prune tree, you get all this secondary wood that comes out branching that you want to crop, and it all tends to grow upright because every time you make a heading cut to a tree, you're sending signals to that tree that the foot race is on, because new buds now are in a foot race to become the new leader. And so they all break and they all grow upright. And it creates more pruning that's necessary down the road. Whereas if you look at the left, with long pruning, by not making these heading cuts, especially in the dormant season, the tree has more what I call natural apical control. The unheaded leaders encourage more fruitful horizontal branching. So that horizontal branching, you don't see it in a traditional pruned tree, but that horizontal branching then, because it starts out flat, doesn't gain such girth to it, and it remains more flexible because it starts fruiting earlier, and it ends up being more like a fly rod, and it bends and it can accommodate quite a bit of weight. Whereas on the right, all that branching ends up snapping because it's very thick, and when it does load up, it breaks. Bending branches to horizontal positions is a well-known technique to encourage early fruiting in apple and cherry orchards, and backyard enthusiasts do it too. This phenomena of bending that branch over horizontally allows fruit buds to become fruitful much quicker. And that's one of the advantages to this system, because the same thing happens in prune. So going back 27 years ago, I was playing around with this idea because I wanted to get away from what I thought were some of the big costs of growing prunes. And I grew a tree with this system in mind, and you can see that it has a very erect, upright scaffolding system and you see the lateral branching, which at one time was very flexible. Here it's stiffened up, and then we maintain its length to whatever we think it can accommodate without breaking. But if any of those outside branches do snap, you haven't impaired the tree itself. It's still capable of producing nice crops without breaking down. The goal I had back then in 1994 was a high yielding tree that was long-lived. This was on Miro 29 rootstock. I didn't want any props, ropes, or wires. We went with a tighter, more upright spacing because we were planting back to where a previous prune orchard had been, and we knew we were going to need to go with tighter spacing. We went with a north-south orientation, 18 by 16, and we got early production through long pruning. So it was very successful, and even to this day, the last 10 years, it has yielded 4.7 dry tons to the acre. So not only was there an advantage in getting early production because these systems fruit much quicker, but also extended the life of the orchard. So let me now just for a bit talk about some of the mistakes that I see out in orchards that I think all growers could pay attention to. One is when you plant the tree into the ground, one of the first things that happens is the planters aren't either told or paying attention, and they're handling the stem of the tree there inappropriately, and they're breaking off buds as they plant the tree. So the planters have to be told early on. They have to be very careful about handling these trees when they put them in the ground. Once you knock off those buds, you're not going to get them back. And the other time that this happens is when they go to paint the tree. And oftentimes you find growers will have their workers use a glove, like a cotton glove, that they can just dip in paint, and they drag it along the length of the trunk there. And they actually, if they do that from top to bottom, they're snapping buds off that you'll never see then because they never emerge. Another mistake, and these are the key mistakes if you want to do long pruning that you need to avoid. They're key mistakes even in short pruning, and that is selecting too many scaffolds, primary scaffolds, and also selecting them from the same location. I think we all know that when you top a tree after planting it, that the strongest new growth occurs right near the top, because that's a well-known phenomena that when you do that, like I say, you set off this foot race. The buds that are closest to the apex, it's a hormonal system, they're encouraged to grow faster at the expense of the ones below them. And because those are the strongest, you like to pick them. But that is a mistake, because what happens, I'll go back to that in a second, is that I'll show you in subsequent slides why that's such a problem. Another problem, though, I'll just show since I've got this slide up is, getting your drip hoses. If you're starting an orchard on drip, you can't leave those drippers by the trunk of the tree very long. Once that tree has become established, you've got to move those drip lines away as quickly as those roots will allow, because wet feet is another cause of blowover. So here's what happens when you make all those selections at the top. You end up with leaving multiple scaffolds. Like I say, I'd recommend no more than 3. You end up on the lower left there, you can see an overlap of the bark. That's called included bark. And that is a recipe for splitting the tree in 2, because as those scaffolding limbs slowly swell in size as the tree ages, they press against each other. And these are the prime entry points, as Daisy mentioned, for heartwood rot entry also. So you end up with this very cluttered problem here that if you had tried to go in after the fact, you're going to have to make some really big cuts that you really don't want to do. So here's what happens when those limbs press against each other and you have included bark. And you can see some heartwood rot in that also on the left there. The other problem with too many primary scaffolds is that the center scaffolding gets crowded out over time because there's more sunlight on the outside of the tree. Then the outside limbs start dominating at the expense of the inside. And now you've just got a real mess on your hands. You have a tree that's opened up and all those lateral bearing scaffolds are going to break on you and your center has been gutted. So what I suggest is when you have a tree, say on the left there, that's in its first year, instead of getting greedy and going for those really narrow dominant stems at the top, is that you make your selections below that and you try to pick stems that are coming out at a flatter angle, because really narrow angles are the ones that split on you, just like walnuts too. These ones that originate, that start out at 40 or say up to 60 degrees of an angle, tend to be much stronger and hold up better over time. And if you need to, if you have a tree that just doesn't give you the options you want, like the one on the left there, you can tell that as that tree grows, it's just going to tear itself apart. Rather than get greedy, just bite the bullet, select one leader and have it push out and start over. So here's an example of what can happen when you don't top a tree coming out of the nursery. I did this just for an experiment. I knew it was going to be top heavy, so I staked it with bamboo. But because it didn't have that hormonal signals from the cut at the top to encourage this apical dominance, the tree broke all up and down its length and had very flat angles to work with. And so this is a tree that gives you all of the options that you want going forward to select the three best scaffolds. So here's examples of trees that are in better condition. You want that scaffolding, preferably you want it oriented up and down. You want some spacing both vertically and axially around it. So you can see as the tree ages here, that tree is set up for long life, and it's not going to be pushing on itself and breaking itself apart. The other advantage to fewer scaffolds is that it allows easier access to the center of the tree with ladders. You can throw the leg of your ladder right in between it, step up into the center, and oftentimes cover a lot more space than having to make multiple sets with your ladder. So this makes your ladder pruning more efficient as well. Here's another problem that I often see in orchards, and that is that the leaving too much secondary wood along the edge of the scaffold there. You need to space it appropriately. This is way too much because that ends up robbing the leader up above. And once again, you have real clutter in the center of your tree. Here's an example of a tree that's just completing its first year growth. That's just a textbook. Todd Ramus here is growing winters, and his dad Tom grew this on Miro 29C, and they're going to employ this long pruning technique. And this was taken back in October, and you can see the tremendous growth they have on that tree. They have 6 or 8, limbs there that they can select from. And so they went in October and selected the 3 best out of those, and they left the full length of that. They didn't top those trees as we sit right now. So here's another orchard that was done the same way. And in the beginning of the second season, this is what you have. You have a bud break all the way along those limbs because they haven't been topped. Had those been topped, you'd get this strong bud break at the heading cut, but not all the way down below it. And so all of that bud break becomes early fruiting wood that you can select from. At the around late April, early May in that second year, you get a lot of vegetative growth, and depending on how long those leaders are, they'll start to willow over. And at that point, you would go in and do some summer pruning. And I'll run this quick video, and you can see this worker has a little hook, so he doesn't have to go up on ladders, and pulls down these limbs. He is making, he's cutting out branches that would otherwise have to be pruned out in the wintertime, but he's doing it now, so he's saving the tree the loss of all that energy, and that can now be applied to growing in the appropriate places. So he's spacing out some of those limbs, and he's going to the top, and what, you know, he's knocking off some fruit, and he's also cutting these back slightly, but he's cutting them to a header or a stem that's already actively growing and has will now become dominant. So I don't call that a heading cut. I call that a thinning cut, because it's done once you have a leader in place that can continue to grow and maintain proper apical control of the tree. So this process takes about, in this case, he's spending about 90 seconds per tree, and that's it for the year. There won't be any more done until dormant season or the next season.
And Joe, I see that you have May through October as timing when pruning is being done like that. So do you find advantages with labor and with disease pressure of extending your pruning
this is a problem all growers will tell you, is the availability of qualified labor is just not there. And often we're all stuck with limited skilled workers that know how to do this work. And so, you know, I have to spread it out even on my relatively small operation over a long season. So, and it just turns out that, you know, that May through October is the dry season, so you have less chance of other diseases, you know, heartwood rot and cytospora also. So that's why I make that recommendation. Also, you're making these cuts, you're not putting all this wood on the ground that ends up being a lost opportunity to you later. The other thing is, as you see on this one, those hoses got moved off the berm a little bit late. It was still wet. I'm not a big fan of berms. I'm not going to spend a lot of time explaining why, but as you saw in those previous slides, is, you know, Wilbur Reel was the farm advisor in Yolo and Solano years ago, and he made the observation correctly that a lot of young trees were dying because they were people weren't accommodating, growers weren't accounting for the fact that when they plant that tree flat, that it's going to settle down 2 or 3 inches, and it became a hole, and those trees were dying. So he said, account for that and plant your trees a couple inches, 2 or 3 inches up higher. So by the time it settles, it's no longer in a hole. But I think growers took that information and went a little crazy with it, and they started planting on these big berms, much higher. And if you're on a drip system, what happens is those roots then run up and down the berm and not laterally, and they're easier to flop over from side to side. Also, it's much more difficult to prune as these trees age. When you have to step over a berm when you're looking up, it just slows you down. So at the end of the second season, you know, you end up with a tree that looks something like this, which you can either prune, say in October, clean it up, or you can wait till spring. Eric Nielsen, who I think a lot of you know from Orland, has been working on this long pruning technique for quite a bit of time, and he's taken it to its, I think, its maximum. You know, he's in this case, he's got a 3-year-old tree on Crimps 86. Actually, it's 19 feet tall. I put 18, but gives you an idea of how tall you can grow a tree with this system. Here's a tree on Eric's ranch, a test tree that was planted earlier that he and I messed with, and this was a 4-year-old tree. Eric's goal and mine too is to try to not use ladders, at least in the initial several years of the growth of the tree. So this tree was not, it was only pruned from the ground, and in its 4th year yielded equivalent of 4.5 dry tons to the acre, and did not break the tree down at all. He's got trees that did over 5, but we think 4.5 dry ton is easily achievable on class 1, class 2, and even class 3 ground, as long as it's well drained. When you get into rice ground, it may be harder to do that. Another problem I see are bench cuts. That's an attempt to open the tree up. I don't think you should try to open the tree up with pruning shears. The tree opens up naturally by the weight of the fruit, and those places where you bench cut, if you look at this schematic here, on the right is kind of what I would call a more typical Sacramento Valley pruning technique, where you try to open the tree up with cuts on the top. And what happens is those little blue marks represent areas where not only is the union weak, it'll snap easier, but also those are the potential sites for sunburn and subsequent cytospora. If you look on the left, this is something I learned from Latney Sale, who was a well-known prune grower in Red Bluff, keen observer of how trees grow. And he one day told me, he says, look, here's what you got to do. He says, don't worry about, he says, you want a tall tree. He says, don't go for these short trees everybody's doing. He says, the way you do it is you let those limbs willow over, and then you cut from below, and it creates something of a step ladder. And so that growth that's growing straight up is what you select for, and oftentimes those are called water sprouts. And then they willow over again, and you cut from below again. So you never expose the top of your limbs to sunburn that way, because there's always some leaf cover. And also the tree, those unions are much stronger and can hold more weight. So, in summary, the points I want to make are, don't try to fight the tree's genes. That these, trees want to get to a certain size no matter what you do, and the harder you cut on them, the harder they're going to fight to get back to the size that they want to become, given their genes and the soil conditions. So, every time you go in there and make those cuts, you're just defeating the goal of the prune tree. The prune tree is not going to spend its energy on fruiting until it gets to the size that it wants to be. So your goal ought to be to just guide the tree into the positions that are going to be the best for you long term. So long pruning encourages early bearing. There's no question that's the case. Making thinning cuts are the way to go, not heading cuts at any point in the life of the tree. I like to prune in the summer to avoid disease. And finally, my last piece of advice is don't try to open the tree up with pruning shears. Let the tree open itself up naturally. And also just want to acknowledge the prune production manual that when I put my orchard together back in the 90s, I was consulting from this book and from talking to these people. Rick Buckner put together the last edition of the prune production manual, and you can see the authors down there below that I've listened to and talked to over the years: Bill Kruger, Ted Jong, and Bill Olson. And I'd like to thank them for what I've learned from them over the years.
Excellent, Joe. Thank you so much. And I think that we have a quick poll question asking if folks are interested in using long pruning in their next orchard, if that's applicable to their situation. So we'll give folks time to answer that. And if you have a quick question, you can go ahead and plug that in the Q&A. While we wait for these to come in. Just a couple more seconds. All right. So definitely a lot of folks interested in using long pruning potentially. So very exciting. And Joe, thank you so much for your presentation and sharing your experience.
You bet. Thank you.
All right, our next speaker is none other than Dr. Franz Niederholzer. Franz is a UC Cooperative Extension Farm Advisor in in Sutter, Yuba, and Colusa counties in the middle of the Sac Valley. Franz is going to be talking about some of the best practices for sustainable, large fruit prune production. So take it away, Franz.
Thank you, Luke. Let me share the screen here.
I won't, make you take on any more counties than you're already responsible for.
Thank you. I see Kat's handling that very nicely down there. So
Indeed,
does not need to be
no encroaching on her territory.
Yeah. We'll have plenty to do. Anyhow,
Yes.
Thank you. Thanks, Luke, very much for opportunity to speak today. I'm talking about, growing big fruit or fruit that pays. And that's, it's an important topic. I've talked about it over the years, and so have other folks with a lot of experience. So we'll get going. There is a poll that's going to pop up in a sec. There we go. I'm just curious what growers, PCAs who work with them think about which is more important if you're going to choose between one or the other, pruning or thinning. I'm curious. We'll take a quick start off to that. Okay, that's such a mix. That's interesting. Thank you. Now, very quickly, we've got one more here. I think it's going to come up in a second. Thank you to Rachel for putting these together so quickly. Excuse me. Here we go. So looking at the different options for practices, sizing fruit. Okay, how does that? Interesting. Okay, I'm glad to see people are intrigued with the spray thinning. I am too. We'll see that we're still working on it, but it's good that there's interest. Okay, thank you very much. So I'm gonna. All right, this is something from. I'll let you read it for a second. This is a quote from James Stockdale, quoted in James Collins' book, Good to Great. Mr. Collins called this the Stockdale paradox. You've got to be brutally honest with your current situation while never losing sight of the end goal and your faith in that accomplishing that goal. So a little dramatic, but I think it does set us up for the conversation to come regarding the prune crop this year and the prune production in general. Because this 2021 is going to be another challenging year in prune production. The world prune supply is flat or even up a little bit in the last few years. This is data from the International Prune Association, and sales are down relative to other end of this last decade. And unfortunately, I want to draw your attention to the gap between the market and production, our sales, is carryover. And it has increased, as you see, from say 2012 to 2018. So the world prune market situation is challenging. And growers know that there's a reduction in price in the last half a decade or so, at the same time that cash cost to produce a ton of fruit have gone up about 25%. Those data that you see here from this number and this number are from the UC Davis Ag Economy Department's cost of production of growing prunes. So also, prune prices to California growers are mostly determined by that world supply, not by the local crop. Here, I showed you earlier the world's prune supply, and there's this dip in 2014, which is basically what you don't see in California production, mostly due to reduction in production in the Southern Hemisphere and in France. This ramp up is French production and the Argentinian production returning to the scale it was before. Down in California, you see this dramatic decrease. In 2016, we had half a crop, but you don't see that impacting world supply at all because of you can see the relative difference between California's crop and the world supply. And this world supply is international production in that year plus carryover. And you'll see that in this next slide, that California prices mirror world production, or reflect world production. They do not reflect California production because California's prunes are moving into that international market and therefore impacted by world supply. This is your price per ton on average across independent and co-op growers based on USDA numbers. And as the world price comes down, world production comes down, price in California goes up and drops away. And there isn't much response to California price. Maybe a little spike here to this dramatic, very difficult crop year in 16. So we can't, the California's production woes, if they happen in a year, are not going to be, there's no real benefit coming from the market. So climate and market threaten economic situation. We've had crop failures caused by extreme bloom weather, too much heat, or too little extended cold weather, or too little heat in extended cold weather. And then the reality that the real market value is in A's and B's. And this is dropping fruit at harvest just because there's no value in that fruit at all. Cost you money to grow to have that dried. So this is data from the PBA, Prune Bargaining Association. The reason I'm putting it up here is just to point out that the industry, the reality of the understanding within the industry that A's and B's have maximum value and C's and D's have significantly less value. The actual numbers behind those values are not, I'm not trying to point that out. I'm just saying, look, from an industry basis, A's and B's are where the money is. C's and D's produce return considerably less. And this is assuming a 3-to-1 dry away. This is about $550, $600 a dry ton to pick, to shake, haul, and dry the fruit. So, and then there are some processors that are not paying for this fruit at all. So A's and B's are where the value is in the market. Again, just a bit of a review, but maximizing net return per acre is going to be the most advantageous in business. And that's net income is your crop income minus production costs. Crop income is tons per acre by yield, by price per ton. And in generally the tons per acre is determined by your the amount of sunlight your an orchard intercepts, by how well the trees fill their space. That's really established with the rootstock and planting density when the orchard starts out, or perhaps interplanting an older block that's at a wider spacing. But today, and that's really affected one-time fixes, if you will, at planting, or maybe once at interplanting. But on a year-to-year basis, production practices influence the price per ton that your crop gets. And that, as we go, it's based on size. So producing a crop with that solid market value while controlling costs delivers the best possible outcome. Maximizing A's and B's, as we talked about, A and B screen production, and limiting costs, not cost cutting dramatically or generally, but targeted strategic management prices of costs to limit your costs. Pruning is expensive. Between pruning, irrigation, and herbicides, that's total pre-emergent and post-emergent herbicides. That's in the 2018 cost of production report from UC. That was almost 60% of your total operating costs before harvest, hauling, and drying. So pruning is a thinning process, removes flower buds with the wood that's cut off. It's also an expensive process. Depending upon the planting you've got and your negotiations with your labor, can cost, I've heard numbers around from 400 to 800 or more per acre, depending upon the density. That's almost 27% based on the UC product cost of production in 2018. That's 27% of your cash costs pre-harvest. A significant chunk of money and an opportunity for savings if you can make it work. And it's also not a panacea. Doesn't work for everything. Here's some data from some work that I did with Matt Bozo a few years ago. Pruning without thinning risks producing small fruit, because all the trees, this is individual tree, fruit per tree at harvest by the percent A's and B's produced by those trees, or those same trees. And as you can see, up to about, this orchard is 16 by 18, so that's 151 trees per acre. In the year of this study, you were anywhere from 75 to 100% A's and B's if you were between 3,500 and 4,000 pieces of fruit per tree at harvest. As you slid further another 1,000 pieces of fruit, you were still above 50%, although that means 50% or a significant amount of your crop is going to be in the C's and D's and smaller. And then once you get past about 5,000 pieces of fruit in this particular orchard, you are in a much more difficult situation. And this whole block was pruned. So pruning is something you can certainly good to start off with, but it's not the end of the year for producing high quality crop of A's and B's. So at the start of the season, pruning can should reduce the number of fruiting buds in the orchard, but it's not the entire story. We are going to look at earlier thinning practices. They're being examined now, have been for the last few years. Obviously, in some of the fresh fruit businesses, apples, peaches, things of that nature, there are practices that are either in place or being considered for early thinning before the fruit gets to a certain size. And I'm just going to run through those right now to give you some ideas of hopefully some directions we're going to go to and things we've learned in prunes as well as in other tree crops recently. This is data from Victoria Prune, which is it's Prunus domestica. It's not French, but basically the number of leaves per fruit are down here at the bottom. As you go to the right, you've got 2, 4, 6, 8 leaves per fruit. So your leaf to fruit ratio is increasing. There's more energy, light interception for each fruit. And as you move to the right, increasing number of leaves per fruit, you see that fruit weight increases rapidly, more rapidly than sugars. But as you increase the number of leaves per fruit, you increase amounts of soluble solids. And since we're growing dried fruit and the solids are left behind after the water's dried away, the goal is to increase your soluble solids, your harvestable dry weight, and increasing the leaf number per fruit is important to that end. But pruning removes fruit and leaf buds. Recent data from sugar, from cherries, shows that most of the sugar to grow stone fruit, in this case cherry, comes from a local source, comes from the fruiting spur. Now here you've got a drawing of a cherry branch. You've got your extension growth out here. You've got your more recent non-bearing spurs here, and closer back to the trunk, you've got your bearing spurs, as well as some non-bearing spurs that have grown up around it. And the research from Greg Lang at Michigan State shows that the extension shoot growth only produces at best 25% of the sugars that end up in these cherries here. And as you get closer to the trunk, the amount of sugar produced by the non-bearing spurs at a distance outside of the immediate area of the fruit is, say 30 to 40%. But when you get into the area of the bearing spurs themselves, you've got at least 50%, 45 to 50+% of the sugars that get into that fruit come locally. So if your pruning practices are removing spurs that have leaf buds and fruit buds on them, you're reducing the number of fruit buds that you're working with, but you're also removing a little bit of the energy potential that's in the immediate proximity to those buds. And if you have a big crop, you set a lot of fruit, then you're going to run into problems as we showed earlier. So I threw this in there because it's a good example. When you're trying to increase performance, this is a stock car, you increase your engine, you maximize your engine, and you minimize the load. You want to have just what you need. You got a steering wheel, gas pedal, gear shifter, the fundamentals. Maybe the exact number of, in my analogy, be the exact number of fruit you want. Without it, there's no back seat, there's no radio, there's no extra stuff. You just want power, which would be a healthy canopy, and the minimum amount of fruit numbers, if you will, in this case, or additional equipment inside the car to produce the outcome you want, which is performance. So reducing the flower number while go back up there. This is on the left, you have trees that were flower thinned the year before, and these are trees that were not flower thinned the year before. So keeping those vegetative buds present, keeping the trees healthy, helps with your return bloom as well. The energy balance and the return bloom the following year. This is some spray thinning results from a very heavy crop year, 2017. The target shaker thinning in this orchard is 36,000 pieces of fruit per tree. In the year of the study, 2017, the trees were not pruned. They're coming out. Remember, this is 2017, so 2016 was that disaster year where there was, in this orchard, had half a ton of crop. So the growers did not prune to save some money, and they ended up with tremendous crop set. You've got, for an orchard that should get at least at shaker thinning about 3,600 pieces of fruit, they had 10,000. We spray thinned with a number of different products, all based on volume to volume. So 2.5% lime sulfur is 2.5 gallons of lime sulfur in 100 gallons of water. And we were able to cut the number of fruit in half. We increased the percent A's and B's over total. It was about 75%, anywhere from 60 to 75% A's and B's without shaker thinning. It's just spray thinning. And whereas the orchard itself, without any unpruned and unthinned, produced almost 5.5 dry ton, but they were primarily C's, D's, and smaller. So this is the kind of results I really liked. It's great to have. We have not been able to repeat this on a really regular basis. Part of the practice the next year, though, we're working that same block, and that block has had reduced, was coming into an off year, and it's hard to replicate it. But the potential's there. We have a lot more work to do before we can recommend things broadly. And to be honest, none of these are registered. There's lime sulfur and fish oils registered, not for thinning. KTS's potassium thiosulfate is registered as a foliar feed, not for thinning. So none of these can legally be applied as a thinning agent, but they can be legally applied as a fungicide up here or as a nutrient. So this is interesting results. enough to keep you going. We haven't answered the questions completely yet. Another good thing to come out of this research was where we had bloom thinning versus non-thinning in the 2015 year, and the year that we had that really rough, terrible bloom, very cold, wet bloom. There was a huge return bloom in the thin trees the year before. The unthinned trees had been pruned but didn't set much of a crop, and you had dramatic increase in production, even though it wasn't, the 3 to 4 dry ton that this orchard can produce. Not a complete disaster, just because you had so many more flowers there to set. So spray thinning is tantalizingly, there's some results are great. Some years we over thin or don't get the results, but we are doing more work. Also string thinning. This is, if you've seen one of these things work, but it's basically a kind of this is poly string, like a weed whacker string on rotating. These rotate like a giant bottle brush or a weed whacker, and they literally drive down the row and knock off blossoms. This is a peach block, the Modesto area. So this is, this has not been done to my knowledge in prunes, but there's a lot of research has been done in peaches. I have not seen anything like that in the counties I work in, although this, it's active in California. So please stay tuned or tune in if you're interested in some of these practices. Please give me a call. See if we can learn something. So for the group, I'm just curious the number of growers or PCAs that work with growers that check fruit at reference date. Not necessarily who thins, but do you go out and check fruit at reference date? Okay, let's see where that's great. Most folks, a majority of the folks that for whom it's applicable do that. So I guess I might be guilty here in a minute of preaching to the choir, but it's good to review. Okay. As I said earlier, there are limits to how much sugar a leaf can produce. The research says that maximum photosynthesis in leaves, prune leaves specifically, is achieved when you get to 50% full sunlight. So there's physiological limitations to the amount of sugar that a leaf area can produce. And if you push, no matter how much water or nutrient you push to that leaf, you may get some shoot growth elsewhere, but we already talked about how that doesn't really get back to your fruit. And you can't make a spur leaf. You can't hyper, charge it. It's got its limitations. So I've been in this situation, and I know that many growers may have been historically that notion that, well, we've got a huge crop set, we'll just feed it and they'll size. That falls in 2020 hindsight. It falls into the category of wishful thinking, and I remind you the Stockdale paradox. If you overset, you've got a huge set, they're going to have to get thinned. So you check your crop load as most of you have stated at reference date. That's late April to early May, and if needed, you thin as soon as possible. This is reference date is when that little tiny pearly structure, endosperm, just first becomes available. First, you can really first find it with your knife blade buried there in the inside the pit. Later thinning in the season does reduce the weight, keeps the trees from breaking, but it's less beneficial than early thinning. You just don't get as much. A lot of the nutrients and the energy you want ends up on the orchard floor, and this orchard has been growing that fruit for at least 2 months. And the reason earlier thinning works is that, or is more important, is to more beneficial, is that the relative growth rate of fruit decreases dramatically from bloom through to end of May. Relative growth rate is the amount of growth that that the fruit puts on relative to the actual weight of the whole fruit. Much like a child, you know, when humans are smaller, our relative growth rates dramatically, you know, is very quick or rapid. You know, in the first 5 years of a child's life, they double their. Or I haven't looked at the exact numbers, but there's huge increase in weight relative to their initial weight. Whereas a teenager, while they're growing a lot, they're already fairly large, and the relative growth rate's less. So this is the same. I think this, as an analogy, this is the same sort of thing early in the life of the fruit. They're growing very rapidly because they're small. They're putting on weight, and that has a long-term impact on the overall growth size. But as you get into late April, that rapid growth rate drops towards 8 in this example, and once you get into May, it drops away almost to the background level. So the earlier you can thin and still get the fruit off the tree, which is usually around reference date, or late April, early May, the earlier you can thin, the better for the outcome on improving fruit size. So I know it's hard to watch the fruit get dropped when you've tried so hard to get the fruit on the tree. So an old timer suggested to me that his experience with fruit thinning is he helps set up the orchard and then he turns it over to either a contract operation or a foreman, and he goes to the beach. So, and this is a lesson I learned thanks to the Sunsweet growers and one of their big growers. Don't over thin. Don't look at the specific number you generate for that orchard. Look at, take that number, the number of fruit you want in a tree for a certain fruit size and a certain tonnage. At the end of the year, increase that number by 50% to avoid thinning. This is the unthinned block had 6,300 pieces of fruit per tree, and I was looking over the shoulder of Sunsweet and the grower, and I said, no, we need to get the exact number. So they humored me, and we got the exact number. And you can see the impact on total production is significantly less than lighter shake and more A's and B's. You get a little bit more of C's and larger, but the net income is significantly larger in this situation than in this one. And you might also say, well, look over here to your net, your production is higher here, but your net is significantly better over here. And the grower told me, I said to him, I apologize for being so enthusiastic about this, thinning hard and then have it unthinned looked pretty good. And he said, yeah, but you should have seen those trees the next year. His return bloom was so much better on the stuff that was thinned that despite the fact that he didn't severely overcrop these, he moved to, this experiment was the thing that helped him move to shaker thinning. So moving from shaker thinning to harvest timing, how you do it, how you harvest, the decisions on timing and what fruit to keep make a big difference in net returns. I realize this is review, but it is good to touch on because it's critical. And I know there's some growers, perhaps not on this Zoom, but on this webinar, but that are leaving money on the table based on harvest timing and their thinning, their sizing, chain sizing operation. So especially in a year like this, where your chances are there'll be a good bloom and a good set, timely harvest on the sizing chain. Fruit is taking, there's net sugar import to a fruit from the leaves until you reach 4 pounds internal pressure. So you're making money up to that point. So shaking once you get under 4 pounds is the target. Fruit's also mature, it's a better product. And there's some growers who can get across their ground quickly, wait till 3 pounds. They're getting some dehydration at that point. It's a very beneficial step to maximizing, to getting the best dry weight possible, and that's putting money back in your pocket or limiting your drying cost. The Prune Bargaining Association did some research years ago, and they said their work showed that if you run an 1 1/8 sizer and you've got to run it slowly to make sure you get all the fruit off. That will eliminate D-size fruit and smaller. I know growers that'll run 1.25 inches trying to drop some of the C screen. As we'll say in a minute, that's hard to accurately determine how much of a certain size you want to drop, but there are tools out there carefully used, like running slowly, to make sure all the fruit's exposed to the chain to drop that fruit that has significantly less value. As the fruit softens later in the season, if you have a long harvest season or start late, a smaller chain should be added, or sometimes those pipe that goes soft pipe slips over the bars, and you don't have to change out the chain. As I pointed out earlier, it's impossible to effectively separate small from medium fruit with a sizing chain due to the range of sugar levels in that small to medium fruit. The sizing chain separates your crop based on the diameter of the fresh fruit. But if the fresh fruit, you get paid by dry fruit, and the soft, let's see if this next, this is fresh fruit based on a small diameter. And as you move to the right here, you get bigger fresh weights and basically larger fruit. And the left here is the soluble solid content. You're moving from 10% all the way up to 28. The large and extra large fruit is usually in the sun. It's got a good motor for it. It's generally speaking going to be 20%, 18%, 19% or higher. Those numbers, you'd like to be at 22 or better, but still it's the large fruit is generally going to make large fruit. Whereas the small and medium, you end up with, especially in the small stuff, a real range of sugars, which gives you, is very, very difficult to, based on the diameter of the fruit, to determine what the final dry fruit ratio is going to be, because your sugar levels are all over the place. And the same goes a little bit similarly for the medium, not quite as dramatic. So it's hard to separate because the sugar and the diameter make the difference in the final product. And with a sizing screen, you can only have the diameter to work with. You're either going to under separate a little bit or over separate. It's very difficult to hit it just right. And that's a decision that the grower and will have to make in the field and adjust that over time as the fruit softens. So in review, we have weather situation, potential for extreme weather, too hot or too cold. It can produce crop failures and threaten the economic situation in prune growers. And then the real market value, you have to grow large fruit to make money. Significant amount of large fruit, percentage of your fruit large. So overall review in 2021, a year where, at least in the areas where I work, which had generally lighter crop last year, we should see a good bloom. The long-term weather forecasts I've seen do not suggest either extended rain or heat spikes. So the general recommendation, as things look right now, is to thin early as soon as you reach reference date and run a big sizing chain later, assuming that you have a large crop, and check your fresh fruit sizes and some sugars as harvest approaches. So large fruit is where your money is to be made. It's what the market wants. And that timing of bloom, up to bloom, where your thinning program, your pruning program, which works as a thinning program there, the reference date activities of thinning or crop load assessment and thinning if needed, and harvest timing and sizing chain are the three critical windows for profitable prune production in any given year. So I don't know if this is the same question earlier. I'd like you to take a look at it one more time really quickly. It's the same thing, but I'm just curious to see if that, I had expected most folks to not be interested in, I had some preconceived ideas. I'm curious to see if there's any changes. And looks like I've run over.
That's okay. Well worth it. Well worth it. This is all important information. I think folks will stay on the line for these last two great talks.
I have one more slide if I
Absolutely.
have time.
Yeah. We'll
Okay.
just give folks a couple more seconds to answer these two questions again.
Okay. Thank you. We'll continue to work on the flower thinning. So just thanks very much, Rachel, for putting those polls together so quickly. I just got this to her early this morning. Well, not so early this morning. Anyhow, one last slide. If I could move past that. Thank you. Just in the process of trying to sort out what weather events produce the most challenging crop years. We, when it gets really hot, it gets over 83 degrees of maximum temperature, we have crop failure, or we have a really, really extended cold, wet, crummy bloom where the temperatures barely reach 60. Those years have been, this is the last 15 or so crop years with California crop, average California dry ton per acre, full bloom date and the year. The red font is for the years that we have had crop failure. In the Yuba Sutter area where I work. And it's interesting to note that the majority, well, all of them fall in the first half of March, which is generally either early to about mid normal bloom. The later blooms, which are related usually to cooler weather, show no impact, even though there were a couple of these years in here where we had some very warm weather at bloom, and generally the crop loads tend to be very much larger than you would see earlier in the season. So, and I put this yellow in here because these numbers are, the crop load particularly are significantly less than the other years, but this is the year where many of the processors stopped paying or paying very low numbers for season Ds. And I think these reflect just growers, good crop years where growers are dropping a lot of their smaller fruit in the orchard. That's why the numbers are lower. Anyhow, so I think we're moving to the point where, yes, it's got to be hot at bloom, but also maybe a warmer fall, a warmer spring, February temperatures coming into March temperatures that push early bloom, and they may have some effect upon the flower quality as well as the temperatures. So we're going to continue to work on this, see if we can get some more information on how the timing of bloom interacts with the temperatures to affect final crop load. Anyhow, thanks very much.
Excellent.
That's it.
Excellent, Franz. Thank you so much. And if folks have any questions for Franz, be sure to put those in the Q&A. And Franz, if you could attack those questions if they populate in there.
Okay.
And now turning to the Prune Board, who is our sponsor for this event, we have Gary Obenauf, the Research Director, as well as Donn, the Executive Director. And I know Kiaran Locy, who is the Media Relations Director, asked me to put some information in the chat, which I just did. I don't know who is starting, but I will hand things over to the Prune Board of California.
Thanks, Luke. I get the nod for starting this panel. And it is a panel. I will start it off, and then I'm going to hand it over to Gary and to Kiaran first, then to Gary. I made a decision to kind of pivot from what I typically do at this meeting, and that is to kind of give you a big overview of marketing activities, nutrition, et cetera. We're trying to increase that level of communication to you all, and hopefully you've felt that both in digital and our print publications that we create. But when Franz led his talk with a few statistical slides about market conditions, he kind of froze me like a pitcher with a wicked slider on a left-handed pitcher with a wicked slider on a right-handed batter. So I've got to go back to that first before we move on to talking about crop management, production research, and what the board's doing in that area. That will be the focus of our panel talk. While first of all, there's no question that the Heart of Franz talk about size being critical for the future of grower profitability and the future of the industry, frankly, is absolutely right on. And that work is, I think, producing dividends in the field, no question about it. We got to continue to do better. What did strike me, though, about the data that Franz produces, that I believe that most of it was not up to the most recent crop year, and then certainly into the first 2 quarters of this crop year. And as we know, a lot has changed. I will be the first to admit that if you're in the healthy food space and you're in the snacking space, and if you're in the consumer packaged goods space, you kind of became the gold standard for food that people were looking for during this period of COVID, not just here in the States, but globally. But they have a lot of choices. And there are a lot of foods that were more dependent on food service that obviously didn't fare very well when restaurants collapsed. We would like to be more dependent on food service, but we're thankful we weren't in this period. But we did a lot of work over the last few decades, our brands and the board, to promote the goodness of prunes from a nutritional standpoint, from a versatility standpoint, certainly as a snack. And, you know, we like to believe, some of our data supports the fact that that paid off when people went out looking for options to the foods they typically eat when they were stuck at home, ways to change up their family meals, and to just eat more healthy food, to stay, to achieve what they perceived as a level of immunity against just general illness, to be well, if you will. So to kind of bring you up to speed on the numbers so far, in the closeout of the crop year 1920, which ended last July, we were basically 1 quarter into COVID, and the 3 quarters.
You're cutting out, Donn. You might want to remove your video.
Were 2 quarters. Yes.
Sorry.
Okay. The 1920 year ended up being up 14% overall as compared to the previous year, which was a soft year, no question about that. And yes, we did have excessive inventory, as did global producers. Through the first 2 quarters of this year, so through January 31st, as compared to the first 2 quarters of the previous year, we're up an additional 16%. So things are robust, to say the least. Domestic is very strong, and our priority markets in the export world are pretty strong as well, some stronger than others, but definitely strong. It is the strongest 2 quarters this year since 2014. So I would, that's obviously positive. It's positive. I would say at the very least, the market is stabilized because of a lot of factors, and to be a little bit more optimistic in that, I think we've begun to see some traction. We're going to do everything possible to keep it going. On the global level, there's certainly another story to be told. And that is that while we did have significant excessive inventory, which we did here as well, the total supply in the 1920 crop year was 357,000 tons. In the 2021 crop year, it's around 150,000 tons. 291,000 tons, so down approximately 60,000 tons in total supply. Production in 1920 was approximately 213,000 tons. These are metric tons, by the way. This year, we're expecting approximately 150,000 metric tons. Obviously, our short crop, which is now at almost 56,000 tons, we estimated 50. Chile being a little bit shorter and sending some fresh plums to China, Argentina having some weather issues and kind of a disastrous crop, and the French having a more normal crop and drawing down their excess inventory significantly. Ultimately, if consumption's at around 220,000 tons, our production is well below what consumption is. So we are righting the ship. A lot of things, a lot of factors that are affecting that, but the ship is being righted. California prices in the export market are on average about $2,000 a ton higher than Chile. The French, being in such excess supply, were considerably lower than where they typically are in some of the key markets where they might be even above our price point. But even through all of that, we have held relatively firm in our price, and we're still seeing these kinds of numbers. We know that's the only way to keep this industry moving forward and to bring growers the value that they need. So there is definitely upward pressure on prices. They have been soft over the last couple of years, but there is definitely upward pressure because of market conditions on the industry. And I think things are in a good position to go forward. So we will do everything possible to see that momentum continues. Now, on to the first slide. We have a strategic plan that includes a number of priorities. Those that are not crop related are all here. Of course, what happens in the orchard affects every one of these things and supports our premium value strategy. Production research, there's no question that the focus of our program is to lower costs and improve prune quality and to protect the investments that growers and handlers make. And I think over the last number of years, certainly with Joe Turkovich's leadership and the committee that oversees this area, and now with John Taylor, we've made considerable strides in sort of narrowing our focus, figuring out what is most important, concentrating on that proposition of protecting investments and improving the margins for growers and handlers by not only maintaining that price point in the marketplace, but by lowering costs, which is maybe, if not equal to, a greater challenge in a state like California. So our research our research committee is constantly looking at those factors in what we do and issuing our request for proposals, and then considering which ones we are going to fund. And of course, based on budget and our need to spread our resources throughout these 5 strategic initiatives. So next slide, please. So this last year, we did a survey. We did one a few years prior to that. I mean, there have been some changes, certainly, but we feel like this is a really good opportunity to get feedback. We had 62 respondents. We would have liked to have seen more. The spread between various categories of respondents is there on the screen. We know this meeting that we're all on now has a lot of PCAs on it, and next time we'd love to have you participate more. This is important. But the growers and handlers that responded were very forthright in the kind of information they provided, not only in multiple choice questions, but also in some substantive or subjective kinds of commentary. So next slide, please. I think I'm gonna hand it over to Kiaran.
Yep, and I think that Luke is putting some of this information in the chat so you all have it easily accessible, but the full survey results, which we'll be going through a summary of these slides, you can get all of the survey results on our website. Within that website, if you look for the Prune Industry tab and then choose Reports and Resources, this is password protected, but you can use password grower handler. You can find the full survey results there, as well as a lot of other resources that'll come in really handy if you're looking for statistical data and updates. Our newsletters are all there as well. I will hand it over to Gary to go over some of those survey results.
All righty, thank you, Kiaran. The first slide here is the broad categories that were in the survey. And of these categories, the disease management was the top priority, followed by crop management, which would be thinning or pruning. And then breeding was third, and water management was fourth. But and we're going to talk more about environmental and regulatory issues as we go through the slides. As Kiaran mentioned, there's a lot of information on each one of these slides, and plus we've also eliminated several of the slides to make this presentation stay within the time frame. And so if you're interested in this type of information, do go to the Prune Board website to get the more detailed information. Next. Okay, this was taking the disease management and then what types of diseases were important to the industry. Number one was the canker issues, 2, bacterial canker, 3 was Phytophthora, and then 4th was brown rot. So again, within obviously bacterial cankers at the top of the list, and we certainly directing a lot of our research into that category. Next. This one is on crop management being thinning and pruning. Number 1 was pruning, and relative to that would be cost, grower cost, not only in getting pruners, but the quality of the pruners that we have. But the biggest problem right now is getting the number of pruners we need to do the job. Secondly would be thinning. Third would be tree nutrition. And then 4th was stress management. Next. This is the breeding program. What are our targets in the breeding program? Number 1, well, we obviously looking at tree structure, lower pruning costs, but right close to that is a lower drying cost. And we got several selections that are coming down the pipe that are showing some real promise and improved dryways. And even though it doesn't return money to the grower, it significantly reduces the grower's cost in drying the fruit, which I think will be significant as we go down the road. Next. Okay, this one is on like I say, I wanted to bring this up and put a little more emphasis on this, even though it was ranked relatively low from a grower standpoint. The problem, this is something that the board is going to pay attention to. One, the political atmosphere federally and in California with EPA and DPR. There's real potential changes coming down the pike that we're going to have to be following. We have the groundwater issue, nitrates. All of those have the potential of becoming a lot more important as we go down the road. Donn, did you want to make a couple of comments on this slide?
Yeah, thanks, Gary. As stated, this did not come up as a priority, and I completely understand why. It's you guys are prune growers, not regulation growers, and the amount of avoided costs that are hidden in regulation, I think, are apparent to growers more than anybody. The fact of the matter is, though, being in California, and all you have to do is pay attention to news cycles, and now, particularly now, paying attention to what's happening in Washington, D.C., there is a critical mass on some of these issues that have everybody trying to figure out what to do next. And the term sustainability, the term climate change, carbon banking, all those kinds of things, and what agriculture's role will be in all of this, whether voluntary, whether through initiative, through executive order or regulation due to legislation. It's coming, and it not all of it may come, and it may look a little different than what's being talked about, but we have a story to tell, and we also have some areas that we need to probably do better in. We also have, some vulnerability, particularly in the use of gas and our dehydrators. So we have to catalog this, and we have to be able to inject our narrative into our discussions with key policymakers, those on Capitol Hill, those in the state, The trade, who are asking questions more than ever, particularly in places like the European market and here domestically, and the media. So you'll be hearing more about this issue as we develop a storyline to be able to provide someone at least a general snapshot of our perspective on stewardship. This is not about turning the Prune Board into a third-party certifier or anything close to that. That's all you need is more rules. But it is about telling a story that, frankly, if you're in California, you've got a great story to tell, albeit an expensive story to tell. And so that part of the story will not be left out either. So this is important. It doesn't necessarily manifest itself in investment in research, certainly not right away. It could. We know there's some work that's been going on with life cycle assessment with Elias at UC Davis. That will be incorporated into our story. But there may be some things to come. So we'll be paying more attention to this basket of issues.
Okay, next slide. Okay, you remember the first slide showed that disease management was the #1 priority. When we asked the questions for you to rate the different areas of research by what would be most profitable to you, would benefit you the most from a dollar standpoint, the rating came out a little bit different. And I think there's some reasons for that. For example, the disease control, again, I think most of you feel like we've got a pretty good handle on materials that we have and when to apply them. We still got some work to do on the cytospora, but we're making some real progress there as well. But from your standpoint, #1 was the pruning. If you had a way of improving pruning, that would put more money back in your pocket. #2 was having a better dry away for the fruit. And you can see the other categories there as well. Next. Then we ask you, and we got a lot of responses, a lot of different responses, but still very good. What could we do to improve the program? The first thing here, and we kind of lumped several of these together that kind of made sense because they were kind of repetitive. But first on the right, most people were pretty satisfied with the program. 93% said yes. Obviously 7% said no. The first bullet there is more frequent updates would help. More Zoom webinars. Several people like the format of the Zoom webinars, not having to travel to meetings. You can get in and out, and it saves you time. Also, more grower outreach was requested, and we're going to try to work with the cooperative extension and try to address that going down the road. Secondly, breeding releases to reduce prune drying costs, yield and production desirable fruit. Many of our selections in the breeding program have fruit quality and especially taste that is equal to or better than French. There's selections coming out that probably down the road we're going to be able to do some marketing relative to the better quality of taste of fruit that we're producing. Then the last one here is reduce costs to increase yield or increasing yield. More pruning, more hand pruning will go away at some point. Next. Expansion of existing pathology went to bloom management and more updates on the canker control. Need to stress UC system. Farm advisors are needed, and we are trying to work with other commodity groups and pressing UC that we do need more farm advisor support. And also the industry is going to be supporting an SRA, staff research associate, to work with Luke and Catherine and some at Franz to help them. They're so stressed for their amount of time. We're trying to figure out ways to help them. And then we're also pushing UC on trying to refill positions as they become vacant. And then several people responded that they were pleased with the program and the direction it's going, to kind of keep it on course with where it's at, and to try more breeding program move the breeding program away from UC. And the problem we've run into there is the cost that UC is charging for union labor, if you would. The SRAs have become unionized within the UC system. Those costs keep going up every year, and their land costs keep going up every year. We think we could do it more cost effectively away, but so far UC has not allowed us to move the breeding program away, and we can't afford to walk away from the material that we produce. Next slide.
Thanks, Gary. So we also asked some questions about communications. You know, we always think it's interesting to understand where our industry is getting information. And this is similar to a question we asked when we did this survey a couple of years ago. But of course, UC is extremely important in delivering a lot of that information as well as PCAs. But we're happy to see that the Prune Board is kind of becoming more of a resource for our industry. And we want to continue to improve upon that, as Gary was just talking about some of the ways we can look to improve on the methods of our communication. We are looking at a variety of things. Of course, COVID has slowed some of those options down, but I think there is a strong intention from our staff to find new innovative ways to connect with growers and handlers for what makes sense for all of us and really distribute information on a regular basis. And so I just want to kind of encourage everybody to make sure that you're aware of the resources that we do have. These are some tools that we communicate with on a regular basis. These really are a complement to the things that the UC is doing. And so we want to make sure that, you know, you're getting this information as well. And it's always a collaborative effort between what we're doing and what the UC team is doing, as well as the PCAs. So make sure you're signing up for our newsletters. I think there's a link to that sign up page in the chat. And then our Prune industry section with the grower handler password that we provided earlier carries all the information for statistical reports, Gary's quarterly reports on research production. Those are all in there. Our annual report is in there as well. But the newsletters are kind of the quickest, easiest way to stay abreast of what's going on, and carries some information just once a month is how often we send those. So, and lastly, I just want to encourage you that if you have any questions, you have trouble finding anything, don't hesitate to reach out to us directly. You can contact me directly. My name is Kiaran, and this is my contact information. I'm happy to point you in the right direction.
Excellent. All right. If folks have any questions for the Prune Board, please put those in the Q&A. And I just really want to thank everyone from the Prune Board for their fabulous presentation, but also for allowing funding this event, and of course funding all of the research that folks saw today. So all around, huge kudos and thanks to the Prune Board. Thanks also to Rachel Palmer and the Program Support Unit for putting this event together. Putting together meetings is not the favorite part of my job, and so I am so glad that they just take care of that for me. They're just pros at this stuff. And thanks, of course, to all of our speakers. So if there's not any questions that pop up, let's pass things over to Rachel, who's going to give us some instructions on the continuing ed units.
All right. So we've come to the close of this webinar. If you need Certified Crop Advisor continuing education credit, and you have the app downloaded onto your phone or your device, scan this QR code and you will automatically be registered as an attendee for today. If you do not have that app, we will go ahead and we're going to send everybody an email by 5 p.m. today who's attended today with instructions on how to submit your information to us so that we can submit it then to CCA on your behalf. And also with the Department of Pesticide Regulation, in that same email, we will include a link to an exam. If you need DPR, and only if you need DPR, You should take that exam, and you'll have until March 2nd. So next week on Tuesday by 8 a.m., you'll need to take that test and pass with a 70%. We will let you know. It does not automatically give you the number of answers you had right or wrong. We will email that to you by noon on Friday next week, March 5th. And if you do not have a passing grade on that one, we will send you a retake, so with the new timeline. And that's about it. We have an evaluation. When you close your browser, when I end this meeting or this webinar, you should be able to, it should pop up. And if you can complete it, it would be great. We love feedback. And I believe that's it.
Perfect. Rachel, thank you so much. And folks, again, on the DPR credits, do not bombard Rachel and the folks at the program support unit with emails saying, where is this question, this quiz that I need to take? That will come to you. It may not come until after 5 p.m. today. So some patience there, and you'll have a week to take it. And then please do fill out the survey. Really important information that we need at Extension to make this service to you better. Thank you all for attending. Thanks to the Prune board. Thanks to the speakers. Really another great year, and I hope that we have some good bloom weather and a good crop year ahead. Thanks, folks.